I am. Be better if about 3 of us do, just in case.
It is better if people. Maybe I should set up my computer then. Right, I'll just do it.
Mine's recording as well now. I always think the start, George, is a bit like Taskmaster with John, and it's that sort of irrelevant banter that they have. Do you know what I mean?
Indeed.
I shall start talking to everyone in a minute.
Evening, John. Adrian's on site.
Hello, Adrian. Yep, yeah. Found you a cage.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. So I'll let you know later. Speak to me about it later, Adrian.
Okay, mate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just see the right nourishment, so I've got to feed them now.
Exactly.
Right.
Evening, Ron Payne. How you doing? Unmute yourself. Press the unmute button, Ron. Right, yeah, that's it, I think. No. Ron, your microphone's not working. I think you're unmuted, but mic's not working. You got to put your sound up, maybe. Can't lip read, I'm afraid. Have a look round, see if you can find a little button that a little red. I think it comes up as a red microphone with a. You've been unmuted anyway, so you should. It's probably just your sound that's down. While I'm waiting for you, Ron, to get your sound sorted out. See who else is here want to talk to me. Ian Stanley, I had a word with your mate tonight. Gavin.
Hello, did you?
I did. I was having a little chat to him, yeah, make sure he's still okay.
Yeah, he is. He's doing very well.
I invited him tonight, but he didn't say if he was coming or not, so we'll just wait and see.
He normally leaves the computer stuff to me to do, like you know from before. You doing well, John?
Yeah.
Everyone else there?
Oi, stop shouting on
Oh, I've been told off for shouting because you can hear in the other bit.
Oh, blimey. Oh, God. You always get told off. I've never known a man get told off so much.
Oh, I do pretty well.
You can't hear me, can she? She's not hearing me.
No, I've got earphone on, so you're all right. You can say what you like, John.
Thank God for that.
No, you can't, she says.
Oh, dear.
How the birds doing?
Very, very well indeed.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're on, I don't know, about 50 rung, I think.
That's good. Yeah, no, they seem to be quite good this year. It's not bad at all.
Yeah, few disasters, but you know, you always do, don't you? It's livestock and it's budgie breeding, so it's all about the odd disaster.
Yeah.
I just had one today. She'd laid 5 eggs. The first one was clear. Second one she's addled. Third one she's eaten. Fourth one went missing, so presumably that's missing. Fifth one I managed to save because she'd only laid it yesterday. So that's gone in the incubator and all the rest. So I shall leave her. I've left her with 2 dummy eggs. Hopefully she'll carry on laying, and then I'll chop her head off, throw her in the bin, and no, I'm only joking. And we'll, you know, try and get around out of her.
Why do they eat them, John?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good one for Kevin later on, because that could come into the questions tonight about Budgerigar, you know, what they eat and don't eat, because maybe if they're lacking something, they eat the egg.
Yeah. Why do they eat each other, John? I had one. Why do they eat the baby had died? I thought she'd actually feather packed it. When I looked closer, she wasn't. She'd actually eaten. Yeah, she'd actually eaten the bottom half on the back where the breeding ground is, and was eating in through the flesh. And that was the hen that was doing that. It wasn't the babies. It was the actual hen that was eating its own baby. And crop was got food in it. You know.
Yeah, I've seen them go through the head a few times, because that's probably what they're doing, is hanging on the perch, picking the babies up off the floor and throwing them around the cage. And then, of course, the blood comes out, and I've seen them then eat through the head, and you know, the brains, and sometimes the whole head goes. But I do know some people, especially people with mixed ovaries, who throw a chicken carcass in the bottom of the ovary, and next day it's nearly gone.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
They're lacking.
Are they getting different vitamins out of it? It's not nice.
Absolutely, yeah. Protein mainly, I would have thought, but there'd be lots of vitamins in there. And, well, about minerals. But Kevin will tell us all about that later on. So he can tell us why they eat each other, or why they need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else are we going to talk about?
There you go, Kevin. I've got it set up on the other one as well if you want to.
Oh, brilliant, George. Thank you. John, are we clapping for heroes at 8 o'clock in a socially distanced way so we don't increase infection rates by inadvertently clapping?
I didn't even know. I didn't think that was back on, is it?
Yeah, tonight. Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll all have the clap then.
You can all go outside and have a clap too close to your neighbours and spread COVID around, and then think you're doing some benefit.
All right. So we'll have an early pee break then, shall we?
Wrong one.
It's 8
Kevin.
o'clock.
I'm
8
on
o'clock.
the
Yeah.
other one.
Oh, I've activated your wrong one, George. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, I can withdraw your co-host permission. Right, let me find the other one.
I could have actually done it from that. Well, I don't know if I could do it on the iPad. It's complicated. iPad's got really limited capabilities.
Oh, it's Apple products. Is that
It's actually
right
a
one?
tablet, but you know what I mean. Sorry. Yeah, that one's better. Yeah.
John, we're doing 7:30 start and 7 o'clock, getting everybody in.
Exactly. Yeah. Let them in, and we'll just have a chat. Anyone know why I've got big pictures up today? Normally I get 25 on the screen, and if there's 50 of us, I'm only using 2 screens. At the moment, I've only got 9 per on the screen, so I'm going to be here all night switching around. Anyone seen a button for more pictures on the screen?
You've entered full screen, John?
Well, I've got I'm on gallery view. Let me go full screen. No, full screen's still got the 9.
Oh, I don't know, because I've got 25.
Well, I normally do, but yeah, gallery view, I've only got 9. Oh well, I'm gonna.
As long as they're the best 9.
They're not bad. Yeah, they're not a bad lot. It's only George that's in it still, but apart from him, it's all right.
I moved upstairs, John. I get in less trouble up here.
You got what? Sorry, Ian?
I've moved upstairs. I get in less trouble. I'm not. Of course, she's trying to watch the telly, isn't she? In the same. We're long lounge diner, but when you're on, the trouble is, and we all do it. When you're talking online, you tend to raise your voice.
Yes.
She's trying to listen to what's happening in America at the moment, and Joe Biden and everything.
Oh, blimey, yeah. It's like walking down the high street when you're on the phone, isn't it? The whole high street hears you.
Here's what you're saying, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Right, who else we got? Who else we having? Who we got? I haven't spoke to for ages. Amanda Cartledge. Sorry, love. How are you? Press your button.
I'm good, thank you.
Good. What have you been up to? Plenty of birds breeding?
No, not at the minute.
No?
I'm too busy with work at the moment, so I'm just having a bit of a break from that.
Okay. Yeah, you're one of the workers we're going out to clap for tonight, are you, or not?
Don't clap on my behalf.
So what are you going to do? You're going to have a start in the spring, are you? And have a.
Yes.
We're not going to have any shows this year, so there's probably no reason to breed any birds too early, is there?
No, that's it.
Have they confirmed that, John?
No one's confirmed anything. I'm just reading into it, really. But the government keeps saying, well, it might be all right in the spring, but hold on for the winter because it's all coming back again. Yeah. I can just see, we're not going to be without some sort of restrictions, are we? I don't think so for the rest of this year. It might be easier, and we'll be in whatever it's called, class 1 or 2, whatever. But I wonder how many. Being that most of us are over 60, us budgie breeders, how many of us are going to want to go and mix and have big hugs and shake hands with people we haven't seen for 2 years? I wonder how many people want to go out and do that.
The other problem, John, will be the restrictions in the halls, what we can get into, how many people we can have, how we're going to buy security, in and out. Yeah, but later in the year, it's a possibility. I think from we got our show in August at Hastings,
Yes.
and I think that's could be, but September onwards, I think there could be a few late ones.
Yeah, I hope so. It'd be nice. It'd be nice to get
Have you guys in England
the early August ones.
Have you guys in England
wants
had
to
letters?
talk?
Hello. Have
Yeah, go on, George.
Have you guys in England had letters through telling you like the order that you're all going to get vaccinated? Because we've had them in Scotland. Not like the dates or anything, but like certainly the sort of order of priority.
Yeah, the 80 odds are being injected now. And I think
my mum's had one.
The 70 odds by the end of February, I think.
All right, okay. So you've got dates then, because we haven't got dates, but we've got like kind of. I can't find the letter now.
No, we haven't got
the website for you up at your end. It's
We've
on
only
our
got a rough
website.
idea, haven't we?
It's not dates. It's just what they want to get done in the order they
targets,
want to get them done.
Okay, yeah. All right, okay, that's not so bad then. Yeah, I still think it probably at least 6 months before they're going to be even halfway through it. So I think you're probably right to not expect too much.
I live in Dartford, and I found out today we've got a swimming pool just opposite me, Fairfield Pool, and because they've closed the gym down, they've turned it into a COVID testing centre, not to go and get your jab done, just to go and be tested. And I didn't even know it was advertised or anything. And I said to a woman that came out, I said, well, how did you find out about this? And she said, oh, if you go Kent online and put in about it, put in Fairfield Pool COVID testing centre, it brings all the info up on it.
All right, there you go. Government website then, find out when we're all going to get it.
Yeah.
I'm going for it. There's a few people I know that said they're not, but anyway, don't want to start politics, do we? Whether we should be doing it or shouldn't be doing it. Otherwise, I'll be back here next year. Say, which lot are you lot? Which ones are you lot? Didn't have your jabs, you know? Why are we still got this thing? So we'll see what happens. Well, who else we got that I haven't spoke to for a while? We got Mohammed. Hello, Mohammed. How you doing? Unmute yourself, Mohammed. Tell us where you are. You have to unmute yourself. No. Can you say that's it, Mohammed?
I'm from Egypt.
Oh yeah. Oh, nice of you to come in to see us then. Is this your first time visiting us?
Yes, it's my first time to see you. So.
Good. Well done. Well, welcome. Can I ask you? Obviously, you breed budgies, Mohammed. Are you normals or a lot of rare breeders in Egypt?
We have a lot of breeders here in Egypt, and I'm breeding budgies since 6 months or 7 months.
Okay, lovely. That's good. Well, welcome. Nice of you to come in and visit us tonight.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yep. I'm just saying thank you very much for coming and visiting us tonight, joining us. It's very nice to meet you. Always good to meet people from other countries. So, actually, I was due to go to your country for the Young Bird Show last year, and had to back out because just before, I think it was April, isn't it, your Young Bird Show? Losing you, Mohammed. We'll speak another time. Right. Anyone else want to talk to me? Tell me about what's happening. How about you, Mikey Simpson? What you doing? What you been up to?
Keeping myself safe, John.
not letting anyone in the door then. Is that all we're going to talk about all night?
That's dead right. That's dead right, mate. I've been keeping the doors locked.
Yeah. It's got to be good for the budgies, though, isn't it? It's got to be good for the budgies. We've never seen so much about, but well, I have actually, because it makes no difference to me. But the people who go to work, of course, they're spending a lot more time with their feathered friends, aren't they now?
Yeah. Well, I certainly have a lot more time down with the birds than I used to have. Whether that's going to make any difference when I start breeding in February or not, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I'll be just starting to go down with the second roundabout then.
Right. Right.
I don't know if I've done, because I'm on first round now, done say 50, but of course, a lot of birds I didn't put down at the beginning, a lot of either clear or we've started them again, you know, like maybe you got 2 in 2 nests, so you make up a nest of 4, don't you? And then let the others go down again. I never know when to call it when round 1 finishes. Because if you I like to think, well, I don't do more than 3 rounds, but I mean, if you think how many pairs you put down over the year, it could be 20 rounds, couldn't it?
Well, it could, and the thing is, the knowledge of your birds, isn't it, John? Knowing how much you can get out of them, or who's had enough, and when to split up. Yeah,
I wasn't really thinking of the same pair. But sometimes I
think John, the easy solution to that is when your best looking pied starts wandering around the shed with a number, holding it up like this. That's probably a sign you've moved on to the next round.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I must admit we had a pair that stayed together for 7 rounds. We tried to stop them after 3, and she nearly died. So we had to put them back together. And a little while later, she had her 4th round, and then she had 7 rounds in the end. And we let her decide when she'd had enough. So I think it was on her 7th round. I think it was her 8th round. She laid a clutch of clear eggs. We thought, that's it, she's done. and we did split them up, and they were okay. But if I remember rightly, Nicola will remember, I think we put them in the flight together and sort of left them together for a long time before we stole her cockbird away and put him to some more hens. So talking about that, of course, our hens need a rest, don't they? We think, but I mean, why do cockbirds need a rest? I personally don't think they need it. And I've got that same cockbird that was with the hen over the 7 rounds. He went on to breed. Nicky reckons it's 100 chicks now, and he's not left the nest apart from, I think, for a little while with her in the flight. He's not really left the cage for 3 years.
That's how my nest boxes go. The cocks, they kind of stay in a nest box then forever, really, unless they're really neat. You know, unless they've had a heavy round of rearing chicks. You know, you can tell when they've done most of the work. But otherwise, they just stay in the cage, and then once the hen is done, she's out, and you went in a day later.
Well, he's a lazy bugger, a lazy one anyway, isn't he? The cockbird. Well, what do? They sit there looking in the hole. When he tries to go in there, she bites him, and he comes back out again, and you know. So it's not as if they do a lot of work, is it? And then again, what about the hen? All she does is sit on eggs all day, letting him feed her, and then she feeds the chick. So I'm just wondering what all this hard work is these birds are doing. Now, take the blue
nice bird walked in behind you, Dave. John. I said,
no, nice bird. Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a nice bird. Yeah, no, she's right.
Yeah,
better than the others. Better than all the others I've had, I'll tell you. Anyway, back to the point. I was thinking blue tits. Now I've got blue tits here that nothing to do with the wife being cold. No, I'm talking about out in the garden. Now they rear 6 chicks in that nest, and they're out all day long, in, out, catching flies and stuff and feeding them. And they work really, really hard to bring up 6 chicks every year successfully. And why can't our birds do it? What do we say? Oh, come on, give them 6 chicks. They can only rear 3 at a time. Why? They're stuck in a 24-inch cage, nothing to do. Food about 6 inches away from them. Anyway, maybe I'll go into breeding British birds and get some blue tits.
You're allowed to do that. I don't think that you are. But I might be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're not allowed to.
Nicky, no, I'm sure. My Nicky's talking about getting a bigger aviary, and maybe at her place. So I'll be left with the small one here. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I might go into breeding splendids. I fancy a little splendid parakeets again. I used to breed them many years ago.
You're going to be made to breed more budgies, you know that?
because blendeds breed a lot easier, and we could actually use them. I wonder if anyone's done that. Has anyone ever used them as fosters?
No.
Little grass parakeets bringing up budgies. Is that any good? Passed, anyone? No one's done that.
I used to use chickens to raise my ducks.
Yeah. Did you all see that little bit I put in the newsletter about Gabe, our American friend, who uses the little Fife canaries to breed his borders, which are not capable of rearing chicks anymore? And now, of course, he's gone into budgies. So he's using the American budgies. I think it was about 30 pairs of American budgies to breed his 18 pairs of English budgies, something like that. And be interesting, won't it? He said they breed like mad, them little American budgies.
But so did our birds 30, 40 years ago, John. It's only the fact they've changed. We used to have 6 eggs, 6 fertile, 6 hatched, 6 reared.
Yeah.
And they're not fit now. We've got a lot more feather to feed. We've got a lot, not so much more skeleton, but certainly so much more feather. And it just takes so much more out of them. So, it's changed. We've changed what the birds are. It's that's our problem. We created. Sorry. Hey ho, it's if we want the birds that look like they do, we're going to have to struggle to breed them.
Who's to blame then? Is it you judges? Because you've been.
Thank you, John.
You keep judging and picking all these big buff birds. See?
And it might also be the breeders breeding all the big buff birds, but there is a limit because they get so rough at one stage. You see some of the birds that are put up on, some of the websites now. As babies, you can see the feather is going to be so big. They're not going to be up in a show cage. And if they do, they're not going to do anything because they're going to be the extreme.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing every time. We breed to extreme. We pair that to a less extreme bird and hopefully breed a winner. Is it the right way of doing it?
Don't know. Seems to be working, doesn't it? Apart from the breeding of them, which is a bit harder.
We don't get numbers, do we? Because they're much harder to rear up and to. I got one this year, 6 eggs, 6 fertile, 6 hats. So immediately split them off to other nests because she ain't going to be able to feed those birds enough.
Why not? That was my question a little while ago.
They need so much more. Well, this is what Kevin is going to tell us, isn't he? He's going to tell us
but their
how
food,
much protein, vitamins, minerals they need.
But their food is unlimited and only 6 inches away from them.
We selectively breed birds to look a certain way. We don't selectively breed birds to breed well. So when it comes to pigs, we used to have we always have 2 herds. One herd bred specifically for size, and the other herd specifically bred for having large litters. And you end up at the last moment you cross them together so that you could have lots of baby piglets, but with the good pork on them. And so we have selected birds for 100 years just to look a certain way, and we very rarely select them because of their amazing breeding skills. If we totally changed our attitude, and it didn't matter what they look like anymore, if the competition was to raise 6 chicks successfully for 6 rounds, 7 chicks successfully for 7 rounds, if that was what the competition was, and that was what everybody was amazed at, then that's what our birds would do.
Do you think that's why that, over the last 4 years, and I mentioned 4 years because I always remember the Lutoff talk where he said 4 years ago he started to reduce the size of his birds. That makes me think, I wonder if he's reduced the size and the weight, or is he just reducing the feather? Because that, like I wrote the other day, we've got a chick that at 24 days old weighed 84 grams. And I've not heard of another bird that's weighed that much. But it's not a monstrous bird feather-wise. And I bet there's other people breeding birds just as big in looks, but theirs will be all feather. This is all meat. So, so I think you can keep the big bird, but you're just going to have to lose the feather and build up the body, build the body or the bones. Does that make sense, Kevin, or not?
I don't think we need to pick one or the other. We can have them both. We just need to give them time, and we need to select the right ones that can do it. We've decided just now, right in this conversation, that we have to have one or the other. We can have both. It just takes a lot of time to select all the right ones that can manage both, and then eventually we would manage both. But by then, who knows what in another 30, 40 years, what will we want from our birds? What are they going to look like?
Yeah. Well, up until this year, ours have always, one of our pair has always been a lesser. It's only this year that we've been lucky enough to maybe have more or lessers around. So a few decent pairs have gone down together, call them best to best or whatever you like. But apart from a lot of youngsters in the nest, which you can't be sure until after they molt, I don't really know the result of that other than it looks good at the moment, but I have to wait and see.
You think you might have problems in a year or two's time, maybe like some of the other breeders have, because they've got rid of all their lessers and they all of a sudden have loads of really good birds and they're rubbing their hands together. I would be the same. Oh yes, finally got a shed full of amazing birds, and then 2 years later you're like, can I get the bloody things to breed? This is happening, that's happening. I'm just getting buffier and buffier, even though I'm using the most lesser ones I've got. That's terrible English, but you know what I mean. I don't know. I'm surmising. Who knows I don't know what the answer is.
When I'm saying that, that lessers, I think we're breeding still some of those big birds, but rather than calling them lessers, we're breeding to what I would call showbirds. So we've got stock birds, showbirds. They're both good birds. They're both best to best, but best in different ways. Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's what we've done, because we noticed that in the shows last year, the birds that we did best with were not what we thought were our best birds. They just happened to be good show birds that did well on the day, that showed themselves on the day. And I remember looking at Ian here when Nicola won best in show at Hastings. That bird was nowhere near one of our best birds. It was just it's quite a good show bird and still is. It was just a good bird on the day, but it was nowhere. It was not a stock bird, was it, Ian? If you can remember.
Good condition. It was showing itself. It did everything right on the day, and it had a quality there. And you say yes, it's the judges, but no, the judges are coming down. I think we've got the buff birds that we're using. I mean, the pair that's bred for me best this year are what I call intermediate birds, but they're churning out better birds than themselves. But when I look back at the parents, I can see why. And in that same hen and the cock, there is one dominant cock that goes back, that's churned out youngster after youngster. So there's a dominant characteristics there that follows through. And it's finding that. That's why, as you get going, breeding lines of birds and knowing where they've come from. And when you buy birds in, if you get 1 out of 10 that you buy in that's improves your stud, you're very lucky. The other 9 aren't going to fit in. But I've seen so many breeders, they've come to the top by using the big buff birds, and then they get feather problems. So then they're doing, like you said earlier, like Daniel Lutoff, they've had to back away and bring it back down again. It's finding that balance. And if you look at all the people that have won the club shows and major shows, they've hit a peak and then something's happened in their stud that they've either gone over the top or they're going backwards, and we're all doing this. We're up and down, trying to get above to better. I think one of the good decisions was Germany actually saying about if a bird can't see, then it should be put down, because that's going to extreme then. Okay.
No, listen, I think it's 7:30 and it's time.
I can get Kevin on.
Yeah, it's time for Kevin, I think. I think everyone, everyone knows our Kevin Eatwell, Dr. Kevin Eatwell, and he's introducing himself now. So I'm going to let him get on with our Budgerigar nutrition presentation. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, no worries, John. You'll just have to keep track, because it's going to be, I got my phone as well, so I can keep track of time for clapping for heroes at 8 o'clock. Although I've eaten most of my heroes, to be honest. I quite like them, but anyway, apart from the fudge, that's quite unpleasant. Right.
The Haribos.
Haribos, yeah. Haribos or Marm are also good, or equally taken. Okay, so I suppose we'll talk about budget nutrition tonight, and I guess it's a big subject. Some aspects of it I've already covered in previous meetings, which of course they're all on the health group area and files and stuff anyway. But if we're looking at, I guess, traditional, what we would feed our birds, this is what you're looking at. This is the sort of things that we will be offering, and I guess we need to look at improving what we do longer term. And I think if you're looking at how am I going to feed my birds, the first thing we got to work out is, well, what do they actually want? What do they need to keep themselves going? What are the extra demands of egg laying? What's the extra demands of rearing on those birds? And what are the demands on growing chicks, I guess, or molting, for example? And so I suppose for me, we need to start at the start. And for me, the basic things to be looking at, given the sort of diet that the birds are eating, is basically energy content, protein content. Fats and carbohydrates tend to sort themselves out by the nature of the diet that our birds are on. I'm not really going to go too much into that, although your fats and carbohydrates, to be honest, are what is going to be leading to the energy content of the food primarily. We know budgies are granivores, okay? So these eat grain and seeds. That's what they do in the wild. And I guess that's where a lot of our captive nutrition follows on from. And, if we look at some general points and tips towards basic sort of maintenance of what we should be looking at these, and again, there's lots of, some older, some newer references out there, but obviously are nicely peer-reviewed. And really, when you're looking at what sort of diet you should be feeding, to some extent your anatomy and physiology can guide what you should be looking at feeding them. We know in the budgies, for example, we have a very muscular gizzard, so this is designed for a seed-based diet. We don't have Budgerigar, they're not hindgut fermenters, so they fit into that granivorous category as we would expect them to. Now, this comes to opinions here, and this is quite an old picture here, but it has amused me. Partly amused me for a variety of reasons, really. But this is back in the days of yore, when Trill was sponsoring the BS, obviously as a major sponsor, and the fancy was, I guess, 10 times the size that it is now. But we have. You can all try and work out who these people are. I know one for sure. But anyway. The BS counsellors and senior sort of fanciers went and visited Waltham many, many years ago to see what they were doing. And Waltham at the time were doing a fair bit of research, actually, into budgie nutrition. Okay, targeted and promoted at pushing Trill. And to be honest, that information and that research was never, ever, much as it was a sort of an arrangement with the BS, was never actually taken forward or even disseminated, which is quite sad. And I think this is I guess this is more the era of what politics has done now internationally, is that everybody feels they're entitled to their opinion. And of course, everybody then gives it. And we have that in the budgie fancy repetitively about diet and everything. I think what entertains me is the bottom one by Douglas Adams here, that basically saying that all opinions are not equal. You're entitled to your opinion, but whether it's valid, whether it's evidence-based, whether it's real or fake or misinformation, is something completely different. And I think, when we're looking at politics internationally and the likes of COVID and so on and so forth, the new sort of world that we're finding ourselves in, the amount of opinions being voiced by people who shouldn't be voicing them in a public scenario is quite marked. And so every bird breeder you'll come to will have an opinion. The question is it actually a valid one? And that's the question you need to be asking. Now, if we look at, I suppose, the evolution of diet formation in captivity, then you tend to start going with, what do they eat in the wild? Let's try and match that. And then I suppose your second sort of stage of that is to go, oh, well, maybe we should look at what chickens have. Maybe we should just pretend you're a chicken. And we do that. That's, there is some logic there, I suppose, but, your chicken is a hindgut fermenter, doesn't have a muscular gizzard in that sort of sense. So, slightly different. And then I guess when you go on to the next sort of level of evolution is where you're looking at, I guess you're looking at individual research now on the species we're dealing with more specifically. And this is just this is sort of a picture of Kent. No, it's not Kent. It probably could be Wales, actually. But the fact of the matter is this is caveman running around doing lots of hunting. They need to tidy the place up, really. Let's be honest, they've just left a load of rubbish around. I mean, let's be honest, it's not very good. But, you know, obviously we had a diet when we were cavemen, and now this is our diet. This is Rob. I think this is all he lives off, I think. The reason I'm putting this in here really to some extent is to make you very aware there is tremendous plasticity, certainly in a lot of species, in terms of the diets that they can get away with and yet still function. I know for a fact that my diet is different to George, but he's not dead and neither am I. And so what I'm saying is just because we don't necessarily have a narrow, we don't need to have a narrow view of nutrition. We need to be hitting the ballpark for the individuals whilst trying to avoid deficiencies and avoid toxicities. But there actually is quite a range in which, you know, the nutrition level will be adequate. And if we go back at looking at, I guess, species of citizens and what they're designed to do based on beak and environment, and if we actually just, you know, scroll down to the bottom of the list here, budgies are on seeds, fine. And if we look at the key points for budgie, then this is it. We don't know that they can take lactose. So things like milk, for example, much as if you go back into a lot of the papers from the 1960s before anybody was lactose intolerant, we've got people recommending, you know, PhD doctors, sort of, you know, professional people recommending milk for birds. We don't have Siki either. So really what we're looking at here is a granivorous species that's designed to take seed. The interesting thing when you're looking at granivores, and this includes the budgies, is these guys can survive without drinking water. They produce enough water metabolically through basically, you know, assimilation of fats and carbohydrates to replace their water losses. So basically your budgies don't need to drink, particularly not at cool temperatures. At higher temperatures, they do obviously need to drink because of the, you know, the increase in the environmental temperature. We also know these guys are able to pass urine from their cloaca, which is sort of passed through their kidneys, up into their rectum or colon, and able to absorb more protein, salts and water from this as well. So we know that is the case as well. So budgies don't really have to drink water. Okay, they do drink water, they choose to drink it, but if you withhold water, then they're able to do that perfectly fine. And these are fairly old papers, but again, you know, we know they don't need to drink. What we also know, looking at water intake, and this is from a more recent paper here, that basically the variability between each individual budgie in terms of the amount that it's going to consume is incredibly variable in terms of water intake. Maybe, you know, up to sort of 50% variation on between birds. Although it was found on some of these studies that the birds tended to be consistent in what they drank. It just was variable across the lot of them. And I suppose for me, this is something that I think I've probably mentioned in every single talk since March. But the fact of the matter is they don't need water. Their intake is incredibly variable. If you're giving fresh fruits and vegetables, other things as well, then obviously they don't need to drink at all. So if you're going to give any medication in water, or you're going to give supplementation, nutrient supplementation in the water, you basically are not going to get an adequate amount in. And if they don't like the taste of it, they're not going to drink it. So certainly from I guess from personal experience, when I was looking at all this, is God, 20 more than 20 years ago, looking at amphotericin B, when I was looking at voluntary consumption of amphotericin B, just as a ballpark, we know if you're putting amphotericin B into the drinking water for Macrorhabdus, that's based on each budgie drinking 4 mils, which we know they do spontaneously. But as soon as you put amphotericin in that, I was recording my birds were down to drinking less than one mil per day each. And okay, there's evaporation and there was spillage and all sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is, you know, it was at best a quarter of what you expected. And so if you were relying on amphotericin B to eliminate Macrorhabdus, you were underdosing them by fourfold straight away. And of course, if you increase the concentration of the product, then you're probably going to end up with them drinking even less. So just a demonstration, really. This is a second demonstration here looking at, and you've seen these slides from the chlamydia talk earlier on this year as well. But this basically, the clear boxes here are the 400 mg per litre drinking water. So these are budgies giving the same amount of product and the same amount of water, and then we're looking at the plasma levels of doxycycline these budgies were achieving. And you can see here, we've got few individuals here that are nailing the level that's needed to be effective against chlamydia. And we've got others here that are like, yeah, I'm not drinking that stuff. Massive individual variation in drug uptake. So in water treatment of any product is incredibly variable and would be something I would, to be honest, not be advising at all, full stop. There's no evidence that we have a consistent amount here that works. And if you're thinking, oh, that talk's rubbish, when you go into your bird shed and you're doing your fresh drinkers on a daily basis, pop them all on, come in tomorrow and see which bottles have gone down more than others. Just ballpark it. You'll know that some pairs are consuming more water than others. Some of the pairs that are on eggs will be drinking loads, far more than some of the ones rearing chicks. It's just completely variable. So as moment as you put something in there that's going to taint or change that water, that variability can obviously increase markedly as well. So we do have to be aware that in water treatment is useless, I think is how I would describe it. If we look at, so aside from me dissing water right at the start, and that, to be honest, is the last time we're going to be mentioning water tonight, is that it is useless, don't bother with it. What we want to look at now is energy content in food, I guess. And we know that small species such as the budgies do have a higher metabolic rate than the normal citizens, and probably approaching similar to what you'd get, sort of passerines even, they are quite high. So we do have a very high metabolic rate. We have a drive to feed even when you're ill. And the physiological state of a bird with this higher metabolic rate has a massive impact on their feeding. That could be whether they're breeding, and that can also be the environmental temperature as well, which we're going to touch on today as well. And on some of the studies and work that's been done on there, we know that the thermal neutral zone for budgies is between 22 and 35 degrees C. So basically room temperature upwards. And we know birds that are similar adapted, when the temperature started to drop below 28 degrees C, this basically means these birds need to eat more to maintain their temperature. So if your bird room temperature is below 22 degrees C, you are making your birds consume extra calories to maintain themselves normally above and beyond what they would do if it was at 21 degrees C or 22 degrees C or 24 degrees C. So if you're doing winter breeding and you've got parents that are laying eggs, rearing chicks, babies that have just fledged, babies that you've just weaned, where perhaps their calorific intake is quite important to them, then obviously having that increased demand of temperature being dropped is significant. And there's two ways when you're looking at birds in captivities that you deal with that. On the one hand, if your temperature is dropping down, you increase the day length. And that means a bird has a greater length of time to consume enough calories to survive overnight. Or you raise the temperature such that they need to burn off less calories maintaining that temperature. And that really is the two ways. If you're keeping passerines, for example, or even budgies for that matter, raising the room temperature and increasing day length gives that bird longer to feed and less energy requirements to try and maintain itself. So my first question to you is, if you go to a breeder and say, oh yeah, I don't mollycoddle my birds, I just let the cold air come through. Do you want to put that additional calorific burden on your birds to make them have to eat more to survive, particularly when they've just weaned or they've just fledged, or they've got a nest of 4 or 5 chicks? this is more data coming from another paper here, which I've just sort of put on here for a bit of fun. But this is looking at the energy that a bird expends. And if you're looking at a pet budgie in a cage, we're going to class that as 100%. And as soon as you sort of put it in an indoor aviary, it's 115. And you can see here, free living in the wild is sort of, 1.5 times the energy that an indoor bird in a cage would want. It's probably an underestimate of what the wild birds would do. But obviously, depending on that environment, we're assuming here that your outdoor aviary in the winter is when you've got that temperature dropping here. It wasn't very clear on the paper, to be honest, but the fact of the matter is it does show here a significant difference between sitting inside and doing nothing versus being metabolically active flying. And okay, budgies don't spend a lot of time flying. They are spending a vast majority of their time perching, which a lot of flying birds do because flying is incredibly expensive energetically. But the fact of the matter is we might be somewhere around the 100, 115% here, but if your temperature's dropping down, that's going to have a big impact on them. Now, if we give our budgies, I guess, free access to food, normally most species would eat enough food to satisfy their daily energy requirements. Okay, we're not regulating food intake, it's not perfect. So obesity is something we can see, particularly for diets got a high energy density. This goes back to Rob and his ice cream and KFC. He's got to dramatically reduce the volume of food because of the energy density in those products. Whereas George can probably eat as much high protein ice cream as he can tolerate before he wants to vomit because it tastes so unpleasant. We know for budgies, for example, we know that basically on some of the studies that have been done, 13 megajoules per kilo of food, this basically results in them having a normal body weight. This is a sort of energy concentration we want in the diet, if that makes sense. And this is again from a study here looking at bits and pieces here, a different sort of diets being fed to budgies, the digestibility of those diets, in other words, how much of that energy was absorbed, and then the net metabolizable energy. And we're aiming here for 13. And we can see here this sort of meal they were fed was 14, white millet's 15.6, red's 14.2, and canary seed was 12.3. Realistically, the energy concentration of seed as a whole, whichever sort of millet you're looking at or canary seed, is hitting the ballpark of the right energy density for a bird for maintenance. This is another one here again, different paper here looking at a different study. But again, you've got canary, white millet, red millet. This actually is trill here. And again, if you're looking at that kernel, we've got 14, 16.7, 15.5, and the mixture that is trill comes out at 17.4. So, the energy content of this diet is sufficient. The argument is once you start creeping over 13, you risk obesity. But what we do know is that this is an adequate energy density for maintenance. The next question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, that's all very well and good. We know what density we want in energy, and we know that seeds fulfills that. The next question is, well, how much are they going to eat? How much seed does a budgie eat? And this really is looking here again at different birds, different scenarios here, looking at what percentage of body weight they would consume of seed per day in a thermoneutral environment, in other words, room temperature or above. And we're looking here at the consumption of probably about 26% of their body weight. This will all come clear as to why this is so important later. Next question, how much does your birds weigh? If you're John birds, they are at least 80 grams each. Mere mortals, they're probably more like 60. But the fact of the matter is obviously our budgie is a different weight to a lot of these ones in these papers, largely due to feather. Maybe there obviously is an element of size and shape, but I think a lot of it is feather. And I think the percentage of body weight that is made up of feathers now on our budgies is increased off what you'd expect on the wild type bird. But we work with what we've got to try and give you some evidence-based answers, I guess. So we now know what our birds weigh. We know roughly what seed they would eat, and we know roughly what energy concentration it should have. And the question then is okay, great. So if I give my bird seed, that's what they eat in the wild. This all should be okay. But the trouble we've got with any captive diet when you're emulating a wild diet is you're looking at mass-produced products of a limited range of variation. And they're probably nutritionally inadequate compared to the wild similar sources. Equally, because we eat enough food to maintain our energy levels, because the wild birds are burning off 1.5 times, twice the amount of energy that a captive bird would do so, they're eating twice as much. So even if the nutrient density, if you like, say we're looking at calcium content of the diet, if I'm eating half as much food, I'm eating half as much calcium. And if there's a minimum amount that I need to make me function, then even though the diet in captivity might be identical to the diet in the wild, I'm getting half the amount that I need because I'm not eating the same volume, because I'm not doing the same amount of exercise and everything else, if that makes sense. So there is an element here of minimum requirements as well, and this is one of the reasons why matching a wild diet doesn't work, because unless you're burning off the same number of calories and eating the same quantity of that diet, you may be deficient in nutrients because you're not eating enough. Because if you did, you just end up into a big blob and not move. If we look at protein next on our list here, then we do know there are essential amino acids. There's a lovely little list here. Other ones here that we maybe might consider to be essential. And this basis, again, looking at chickens, and we're going to have a whole argument left, right and centre here when budgies are chickens and when they're not chickens and when they might be again. But obviously based on the chicken research where growth and egg laying is, production is maximised, that's what they're bred for. They do know that there may be rate limiting amino acids. They cannot make them fast enough, a bit like a COVID vaccine. And so we need to make sure that all these essential amino acids are there. And obviously we need to make sure that we're at that minimum protein level they need to maintain themselves as well. So that comes back to, are you getting enough protein, and are you getting enough quality of protein, if you like, in terms of the makeup of that. So I suppose the first question we've got, now we know that seed has roughly the right energy density. The question is, does it have enough protein? This again is another Waltham study here looking at glycine, which they found basically glycine was irrelevant, which I think is a general gist we can have here. But we're going to be coming back to this paper as we come through a little bit later during the day as well. But again, this is another study done by Waltham based on Trill, which again, much more should have been made of this at the time. I mean, this is 1995, we're talking 1994. So, this is going back 25 years. Well, these sorts of things should have been made more widely available to fanciers, and maybe more things done with it. But there is and this paper actually is in the files area of the health group as well. And you scroll down to the files area, you'll find, actually both these papers probably are, but this one certainly is. And this was their main work they did, trying to prove how amazing Trill was. So you do have to take these sort of things as a pinch of salt and say, okay, I know you want to try and prove how amazing Trill is, but you've then got to break down these papers and interpret them and come out with what you think is practical and common sense. This is where you can get a lot of people falling foul. Just because it's been published in press doesn't mean to say it's the truth. But if we look at the breakdown here, and again, this is looking at white millet, red millet, canary, and groats, is just what they were doing. But this is looking then at your amino acid concentrations in those. The yellow ones highlighted here are all the ones that we know are essential, that they cannot manufacture themselves. Well, they're all present in the seeds we're feeding. That, to me, is pretty good. Bearing in mind, we're probably going to be increasing the amount of energy density of these and things, and they're going to eat more than they need anyway. And they're not, I think we can arguably say that seed probably is providing okay levels of protein and okay levels of amino acids for maintenance. Now, when we're looking at breeding, we do know that the timing of breeding is stimulated by higher protein foods. So we do know that protein is relevant for stimulating reproductive output. Interesting, there's a complete tangent, but there's some lovely work looking at starlings that if you show starlings a bunch of invertebrates behind glass or behind a shield, the starlings will go, oh my God, they get very excited and start breeding because there's lots of life food around. It's that visual stimulus that makes them breed. They don't have to eat them to get higher protein in their diet. They just go, oh my God, the caterpillars are out, let's get breeding. Back to your blue tits, John. But the fact of the matter is, obviously, there's lots of things that stimulate reproduction, and protein content of food is one. And certainly looking at cockatiels, that's happened as well. So if you want to breed your birds, then we've got to plan for this. This maintenance diet that we've got needs to change to get these birds ready for breeding, and we need to modify the protein content to allow that to happen. The next step is, of course, is what the hell do we do to do that? If we look at some of the papers out there, and we're going to finish on this one because it is nearly time to clap for people. But if you look at these here, we've got sort of basically one diet here is 6.8%, 14.4 megajoules, 12% here, 14 megajoules, 12.8% here as well. And this bottom was saying, well, they got a bit fat. But that was an irrelevant conclusion to have made on the paper. But the fact of the matter is these sort of diets here, this sort of level, were maintaining captive budgies, and they were okay to be maintained at that level. In terms of protein, in terms of energy, and in terms of clapping now.
Right. Should we go for the clap then? Back in 5 minutes. Anyone not clapping, just carry on between you.
I've got nobody near me to clap. I'm just going to have to stay here. Is anybody there? Everyone's gone.
I'm here.
Oh, hello. So I had to look behind me to look at the computer to see who was actually on the screen, and then you popped up. So I was like, okay. So I think that you're not clapping then.
I'm not clapping now.
Is that because you don't like clapping, or you don't have anyone to clap for near you?
There isn't
Or another reason?
No, there isn't anybody around where I live except me that works for the NHS. But
yeah, so you work for the NHS and you don't really think it's pointless.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hi.
Your face speaks a thousand words. Hello.
Hello. We're Shane. We're Shane and Susie.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hello, Shane and Susie.
We're not clapping because we're in the middle of nowhere too. But yeah.
Yeah, that'd be all right. Yeah.
I think the sheep in my field would think it's feeding time, and I'm not going to be feeding them, so it's like false advertisement.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question, George. What is clapping? I'm from the United States, so everybody's walking away from the screen clapping?
That's what they're doing. They're going outside to their door to clap for the people who work for the National Health Service.
Oh, okay. All right. I get it. Thank you.
Okay. I can understand why to somebody from another country who would think, what on earth are they doing? What is going on? Because it is a bit crazy. Yeah, I
thought maybe a football game was on or something.
Oh, right. Yeah, no.
Oh.
Too cold
Feel better
outside.
now you've got the clap, John?
Oh, that's better. Always better once you've had a clap.
You need some antibiotics for that.
But it's a bit like the virus, you know. If once you've had your injection, and oh, that's my little baby. Hello. Oh, Kevin's going to sound disgusting. He's been licked by your dog.
Oh, I hate being licked by my dog.
The door open. Back door.
Is that right, Kevin? Have
everybody coming back from having clapped?
Yeah, probably, I think it won't be too long. Okay. Probably only me out. Oh, there was only me out there anyway.
Good, because that means you're not sort of breathing on your hands whilst ushering it to the next person, John. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Just while I got the dog here, Kevin.
Oh.
Kevin, while I got the dog here, is that right? They got antiseptic tongues.
I've got some more.
What?
No. Well, whenever if I've got a cut or a sore, the dog licks it and it seems to get better quicker. Is that an old wives' tale? Is it?
I'll put more there.
Or an old man's tale? Yes. No. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't let them lick your sores or anything. No.
No. Or else, or if you think it works, give it to Amanda and she can take it when she goes into work. Great.
How is that antiseptic? They lick the bums.
Right? I know. I can't think of anything less good than this idea.
They lick their bums and then they're licking your wit. No, that doesn't go right with me. Sorry about that, John.
What are they saying about you?
Next would be sticking leeches on it and stuff like that. It's gross.
Do you cut yourself when you have a cold and let some blood out?
Get a sausage dog. They can't reach their bums. Right. Back to work.
Is that an extra chore that the owners have to undertake to keep their dogs?
Oh.
Right, I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, go on then.
Okay, dog stories aside. Okay, so basically looking at what we know about so far on our little introduction to nutrition, I appreciate I'm not going very far through it at the minute, but we know that seed has enough energy. We know it's got enough protein, and we know it's probably okay for amino acids for maintenance. Right, let's move on. Okay.
Kevin, and again, sorry, I don't normally interrupt you, and I really apologise. But is it a good time? You mentioned about the seed and how much protein and goodness has it got in it. Would it be a good time to ask you about once it's sprouted?
Oh, I haven't covered sprouted in what we're doing here. I don't think there is. Yeah, I'm not covering that today, John.
Okay.
I'll come on to that afterwards. But yes, it's an interesting point. But I'll come on to perhaps logical things a bit later. But sprouted seeds are fine. But anyway, we'll come on to that. Looking at again white millet, red millet, canaries, and groats. This is looking again at your energy content here. Protein content here, and we've got 11.5%, 11.6%, 15.6%. They're all again knocking around this sort of 12 sort of percent area that we're looking at as a minimum requirement. And again, looking at other sort of studies out there, some are all about 10%, this sort of type of thing. And you'll get away with 11% protein if it's a high quality protein source. If we're using seed, we got to argue and say, okay, it's probably not as good a higher quality, but if we're pitching in at 12%, 14%, depending on what we're feeding, we're probably okay from a protein and an energy point of view for maintenance. Okay, if we think there's certain limiting proteins, then maybe we ought to do something about that. But from a ballpark point of view, for a budgie sitting in a cage doing nothing, seed will keep it energy point of view under control and protein under control. Now, if we look at seeds and we try and look at those and compare them to the maybe opening this ball game out a bit now from energy and just protein, we know that seeds actually are deficient in some amino acids potentially. Calcium, phosphorus, sodium, vitamin A, D, K, the whole kit and caboodle here. I mean, the list of appalling deficiencies in seed is quite extensive. And obviously iodine is one, but we've covered iodine elsewhere as well. So much as I'm saying the energy's okay and maybe the protein's all right for maintenance, the fact of the matter is we know they're deficient in everything else. To some extent, we just take these as read as the amount is zero. Again, Waltham again, 1994, whichever this was, everybody, this information should have been made more of at the time. So seed is bad. Seed is awful. It gives them energy, it gives them enough protein. That is it. It does nothing else. And when you've looked at the tables I've shown you here, red millet, white millet, jack millet, canary, groats even, it's all the same. It's all the same ballpark energy-wise. It's all the same ballpark protein-wise. It's all the same deficiencies. So worrying about how much white millet, red millet, plain canary you have in your seed mixture, and whether it's Phil Reeney's mixture or Sam One's mixture or whatever you're getting from Countrywide is irrelevant. It is so irrelevant. It is unbelievably irrelevant. Seed is just seed. Your birds will choose to eat canary. They will choose to eat millet. They choose to what they've learnt to be fed as a baby and what they like. It's the same difference. I couldn't care less what seed you feed, and we get obsessed by it, and we should stop and just accept that seed is seed. And as much as I'm saying it's awful, we do get energy for maintenance. We do get protein for maintenance. But what we've got to look at now is say, okay, if we're deficient in all these other vitamins and minerals, and we know when we're egg laying, and we know when we're rearing, this is also going to be protein deficient as well, we've got to look at how we're going to manage our birds to compensate for all these deficiencies in seed. Now, there's been lots of ways people have looked at doing this, and this is partly by the trill era as well, where people would top dress seeds with stuff. So, I mean, even to this day and age, people are still adding things like Nutrival to the seed and stuff, and it's like it's just completely pointless because as soon as you dehusk it, anything you add has been lost. And equally, if you add in extra bits into that seed mixture, which is what Trill used to do with their sunshine grains, which is just ridiculous, you're hoping these birds will choose to eat the entire seed mixture in balance to pick up these extra bits and pieces. And as you know, if you go through your breeding cages, you'll know there's one pair of birds that will just eat plain canary. There's another pair that will just eat, yellow millet. So dusting or trying to coat seeds is absolutely pointless. Adding extra bits into a seed mixture is pointless. Your intake is going to be so variable that you will fail. So your seed is not the vehicle in which you want to be adding supplements or extras, because it's not going to work. Water is not the route to be adding supplements or extras, because again, we've already explained, we know that doesn't work either. Both of those are the wrong choices to make. In terms of your minerals, calcium and iodine are your main two. They've been covered in previous lectures. They're in the health group in the files area there. The references for those are all there as well. I will be mentioning these briefly at the end of today's chat, talking about them. I guess vitamin D as well will be covered a little bit at the end, but I've been through this before on previous lectures. They're all in the files area, like I say. They're all beyond the archived as videos as well on the feed. So you've got the references, you've got the PowerPoints, you've got the handouts that are recommended and bits and pieces from that, and you'll also have the videos as well. So you've got all those references. I'm not going to repeat those today. If we look at vitamins, vitamin A, of course, we do worry about. This is, again, Dr. Baker looking at things, looking at the minimum he'd suggest per bird is 12 milligrams, maximum tolerance of 750 milligrams. Just like, that's a massive variation in the amount of vitamin A that a bird will tolerate. This goes back to being a caveman versus being Rob, whether you're going to have ice cream and a KFC, or whether you're going to go and eat some raw meat. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of plasticity here. So we need to pitch our vitamin A between these two. That's quite a wide target. General recommended levels of vitamin A in citizen diets around 2,000 international units per kilo of the food for maintenance. Again, vitamin D, I've covered that before on the calcium and vitamin D lecture we did back in July, I think, if I stand corrected. And you've got that, like I said, that entire evening was spent just devoted to those two. Now, when it comes to egg laying, this is where budgies aren't chickens. We know that birds that produce our tracheal lung, their eggs are different to those that produce precocial young. So chickens lay relatively larger eggs because they've got larger incubation times, because the chicks come out, I was going to say oven ready, but that's not true, but they come out ready to go. Whereas obviously from our bird's point of view, they are not. They need a period of rearing. And the amount of protein that you require for breeding depends on how many eggs you're going to lay, whether you're altricial or precocial, many eggs you're going to be producing, and the protein composition of the eggs. Now, interestingly enough, much as budgies aren't chickens, they are chickens, because we know that your makeup of eggs is similar to those of chickens. So in other words, if you look at a chicken egg, the composition of the chicken egg is going to match the composition of a budgie egg. Completely different size, but broadly, an egg is an egg is an egg. And there's lots of studies looking at hatchability and effects of maternal nutrition, particularly in poultry, of course, because this is critical. And this is the point we're going to make here now is it is the mother's nutrition that is determining the level of nutrition in the chick. So we've got to get this right for the hen before she thinks about laying. We've got to prime her and get her ready. And again, we're not going to be discussing calcium here. This is again stolen a bit from the calcium talk, but you know, we know that the eggshell of an egg is mostly calcium carbonate, 94% down here as well, and we know that eggshell quality is critical. And this again, looking at the poultry industry, is a massive thing, because if your egg quality drops, your consumerism drops, etc., etc. And what we don't want is to have eggs that are friable or weak-shelled or porous, drying out too much, etc., etc. So egg quality is important to us because in the context of getting it viable for hatching. If we look at breeding performance and looking at protein and bits and pieces there for you, one particular study looking at here was saying, oh, 13% protein diet seem to do all right, and they're able to maintain their breeding performance. There's another study saying, oh, well, the one with 13.4% with supplements didn't support reproduction either. And you're like, well, which one is it? You know, they're getting different results here. And I guess if you go back, this is going back years now, in terms of these sort of papers here. This is by T.G. Taylor, which you'll recognize was one of the people that was doing all the genetics work at that time as well. And basically his conclusion was that most budgies are able to rear 2 nests on a seed diet. That's about it. And I think that's probably true. I think if you were feeding birds just seed, they probably get away with 2 nests. But we know that if you're feeding additional protein, we know the protein requirements are higher, then you may get away with more nests, that's fine, and up to 6 nests per annum, you know, particularly if it was a German fallow and belonged to Barry, or you know, some of Nicola Bird's birds where they will keep going and breeding for longer periods. But if you want to get that sustained output, seed is not going to cut it. We know that amino acid composition of budgie tissues is very similar to that of chickens again. So we're looking at growth for chicks. That balance of amino acids is probably the same as what we're using for the chickens. So, you know, in terms of egg production, in terms of chick growth, they are chickens. And obviously from a poultry point of view, the NRC, National Research Council poultry requirements is something that is the Bible for the poultry industry, and everything comes from this very detailed, you can download this yourself, it's a ginormous document of every single bit of pointless poultry nutrition you would want to know. But budgies aren't chickens. It's so annoying because they're chickens when they're not. They're really quite good at pretending. But obviously they grow quicker. So much as their body composition is the same, their growth rate is different. And obviously their growth rate is highest at the hatching time, decreases over time as the growth rate begins to slow. So we do need to look at the rate of growth as well as just body composition to make a decision with what is the best sort of diet for our budgies too. And in fact, if we go back to one of the papers here where they were saying a 13.2% protein diet maintained breeding performance, clearly that was also maintaining the maximal growth of chicks whilst they're being reared. So that's quite interesting. But again, it still comes back to you probably get away with that sort of diet for 2 rounds anyway. So the question is, what do we do next? I mean, basically, everyone is feeding seed. The BS insists it's used as a cage floor covering. If I don't feed seed, I've got to convert my birds to a pelleted diet. If I'm buying in the bird, I've got to convert that onto my pelleted diet, and I can't put them in a show cage of pellets on the floor. And economically, with numbers, we're probably not going to do that. So seed is bad. It is just seed, but we're probably going to continue feeding it. But we can maintain the birds with energy. We've got enough protein for maintenance. What we need to do now is say, okay, what supplements do I need to compensate for all the other things in maintenance? And what do I need to add for egg laying and rearing? And that's the next things we need to look at. And again, we know putting a supplement is pointless. We know that adding extras in, hoping the birds will eat them, is pointless. We know that putting in water is pointless. So we've got to add something extra to our diet, and our birds need to be trained to eat that as a supplement. Now, my one proviso here is that I guess if you are breeding, pushing up the amount of canary seed and groats, because they have a slightly higher protein content, they're pitching in around the sort of 14% and not 12. You could argue they are a benefit to breeding birds to replace some of the seed, perhaps because of the higher protein content. But we do know that these values, even that percentage, is lower than we need for growing chicks. Looking at calcium, because we're trying to bring this together a little bit here, and again, this is stolen from the calcium talk, which you've already got. We know budgies for maintenance is 0.85%. We know this is where budgies aren't chickens, actually. Chickens, their calcium requirement is 3.3% of the diet because they're laying an egg every day. So for your laying hens commercially, that's the level they need. But we know for an egg laying budgie, you probably need 0.9%. And we know your maximum level of calcium you need for a growing chick is probably 1.15%. So much as they are chickens, they're not chickens in terms of calcium. We can get away with about 1% of the diet. And that's something we've got to factor into when we're working out how we're going to treat them. So if we're going to put in a supplemental additive, if you like, in addition to the seed, there's a couple of things you need to do first. The first one is breed your own hens. Any outcrosses that have come in will have had a completely different feeding regime. They will reject a novel food source. They won't eat it. Second thing is, by breeding your own hens, is those babies, when they come out of the nest box, you want to train them to take the foods you want them to eat, that you want them to feed to their chicks subsequently. This is something they're going to be learning to do. So these are going to be offered the food that you want them to rear their babies with subsequently. And that's what you've got to train them to do once they come out of the nest box. And obviously at this stage point, those birds at that time point, they are most receptive to novel food. So if you've got birds that are feeding on seed, you're going to change the dietary regimen. Your hens will probably be resistant to feed it initially. When the chicks come out, if you're using that, and for me, I feed soft food at a different time of day to the main seed. Normally, you know, specifically because they've got no choice. If they come in, the seed's running low, they're getting hungry, here's your soft food. I'll be back in a couple of hours. And, you know, it's that sort of thing of trying to encourage them to take that. If you put a bowl of soft food and seed at the same time, they'll probably go straight on the seed because they're fixated on that. That's what they do. My birds are like, no, you can sit and wait for a bit here, or you can have your soft food. And what you want is you want the homebred hens that had this when they fledged and reared. You want these to be used to taking this food, so when they come to feed the babies themselves next time around, they will automatically feed it to those chicks. The chicks will get the optimal growth, and because they're obviously eating it themselves as well, they'll get optimum for egg laying because it's part of their normal diet, and that's what they do. An outcross cockbird might be less keen to take this diet. It's an outcross cockbird. He's not the one that's building the eggs. He's not the one that's important for nutrition in the nest box per se when you've got the rapid growth phase. So that's not such an issue here. It's the hens that we need to be taking the right diet for egg laying and rearing these chicks when they're rapidly growing. It needs to be familiar. It needs to look the same. It needs to be the same. It needs to be something they're habituated to taking. And of course, if the hen's feeding it, then we can see it in the chick's crop. And you'll know you'll have birds that will just feed millet sprays to their babies all day long and nothing else. And you'll have others that will feed the soft food. You can see it in the chick's crops. So formulating an appropriate alternative food source is probably the best compromise we're going to get here. If we're going to be stupid and feed seed, we've got to look at something to complement that our birds are trained to feeding. If you try and fortify existing diets, if they're dehusked and consumed completely, that works. And there is certainly one feed manufacturer that is offering fortified groats as part of their product range, which for me is a very, very logical thing indeed. Option B is you're going to make a soft food. You're going to try and complement for the seed for the deficiencies that you're getting here. We're going to target the known deficiencies, the major deficiencies we're going to anticipate. And we have to appreciate that this isn't a maintenance diet. This is a diet that we're going to engineer to compensate for deficiencies as a result of them eating a percentage of seed in their diet. And if you're thinking about this, just think back to feeding concentrates to grazing herbivores. This is nothing new. We feed concentrates to sheep and cattle and everything else. They're eating grass, that's their basic diet, but they're getting the concentrates, which is going to increase milk yield and feed conversion and all the rest of it. And those diets are designed to be fed as part of the overall diet to a set amount each day to get the bits in they're going to get deficient from pasture to enhance their commercial viability. And that's what we're really looking at doing here for our budgies to some extent, in a much more lapsadaisical, vague way, but that's kind of the aim here. So basically what we want is to get a mixture, and certainly from a concentrate feed in a farm species, they can't selectively feed from that. They want to eat the concentrate because they like it, they like the taste of it, they're drawn to it, but they have to eat all of it. It's a complete mix. They cannot selectively feed out of that mix. And this sort of approach has been used quite successfully for citizens as well. Before we break for tea break, I'm just going to cover a couple of papers here, just to blow a couple of myths out of the water. This is, again, a pretty rubbish paper, to be honest, but they were looking at diets and stimulating the immune response in budgies and thinking, oh, well, is it better that you give them pelleted diets versus seed, and which one has the better immune system? And looking at the white cell counts, they found there was absolutely no different. My immune system on my diet probably is comparable to George's immune system on his diet, although I know his diet is probably healthier and his BMI is probably better. But the fact of the matter is it's not really affecting my immune system. This is another quite a nice one, actually. It's looking at Amazons here that's saying, okay, well, look, if we're going to have these birds and we're going to give them a seed diet and we're going to give them some fresh produce and we're going to give them some pellets, will these birds be able to choose and select an appropriate diet by doing that? Can we make them do that? If we left them to their own devices, would they do that? And the answer is no, they won't. If you have a bird that's mostly on seed, it will not selectively feed and balance that out from what they were doing on here as well. But that said, they were using a formulated diet that was designed as a complete feed, not a formulated diet designed as a supplement. And this is a different thing. Shall we break for tea there, John?
Sounds like a good idea to me. Yes, I shall. I say yes. Yes, so we can do other things as well. You know, if you want to go for a PP or whatever. Yes. We'll back in 5 to 10 minutes, shall we?
Do 10.
And, 10 minutes. I've got to pop upstairs, go and see my auntie, and I'll leave you lot chatting. Where's George? He doesn't normally need to go and relieve himself. Is George going to have a chat to everyone?
I won't be relieving myself. I'll be here.
I'll leave you to chat to a few people then, George.
No worries. I'll see who's available.
All right. See you in 10.
Enjoy your auntie.
Thank you.
Who have we got? So I've got my screen here. You can all see me there, but I have to turn around to look at the screen behind me to see who's here. Mr. Cooper, are you, how is your baby chick?
Yeah, survived. It done well.
Survived.
It was a bit daunting in the air out, but it was, I got her at the end. I kind of gave the drop.
I actually have a couple of birds that hasn't happened for a long time, maybe a couple of years, but there was one yesterday and it was an adult with a big blown up crop like that, and that's much more daunting trying to get the air out. I was looking at it on the perch and it was sat there with a huge puffed up crop, but the chicks is quite common. You'll get used to doing that.
Well, that's the first time I ever had to do it. I was just sitting waiting. I'm trying to push it. And I was thinking, oh no, this has got to burst. And it was just that little bit of pressure came in. I was like, right, okay, again. And as it was getting smaller, I was like, more pressure. I'm doing it fine. I just kind of checked on it today.
If you hold them vertical, so if they've got anything in their crop, it goes to the bottom, and then just hold their neck gently up so that it makes the pipe all nice and straight.
Yeah.
Gently hold their head up. You get the knack to it, and then just gently squeeze it with the other hand, and it just. There's no problem. But if their head is down, obviously it closes the pipe up, and then it's like you're fighting them then.
Yeah, I just come on. My dog's also just put its back, held its head, and just kind of pushed it. Yeah, but it got there in the end. Like,
good man. How many have you bred so far?
15 so far, and I've got another 15 in the boxes. So that's all their first rounds. That's will be gone their second rounds, and that'll be it. I'll be finishing up after that. I lost 4 chicks for the same nest. Ooh, that's stupidity.
No.
When I came in, the 5 chicks were out the nest box, but they were only like 3 weeks old. But I was so concerned that the hens would have killed the chicks. So I just put a budgie hide and left them in. Then she started plucking them, the heads and that. So I was like, right, I'll better take him out. I tried to rear him, but I lost 4 out of 5. So some were absolute crackers. So it was main stupidity. I should have just put him back in a nest box.
So I have a little. I haven't got one in here. It's in the shed, but I've got a little heat pad. It's just a vivarium one. It's a couple of quid off eBay, and so I put that in underneath the chick hide, and I put a couple of chick hides there, so they've got a bit of room. And if the hen starts going at them again, I take her away, but I leave them there on the floor, so the cock can still feed them, and I'm still feeding them. Sometimes I've seen it take a week before the cock comes along and decides he's going to do it. Sometimes they do it straight away and you don't have to feed them at all. But sometimes the cocks are useless. It just depends.
So obviously this was like my first proper time crop feeding.
Yeah.
I think I maybe killed 2 of them myself by doing it wrong. And then obviously being working, I work like maybe 15-hour shifts and try to come in and just try to top them up, and it just wasn't. I should have just put him back in the nest box. I didn't know why I didn't. I was too busy trying to save him for them to kill, and then I ended up killing him. So,
but sometimes you did the perfect thing and it was going to happen anyway, and sometimes you could do the complete opposite and it's completely wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's different every time. It just takes a lot of time to.
So as a learner, I'll just have to take a chances and put him back in a nest box. So.
It's easier when you're there to keep an eye on them. It is harder if you're at work that day.
Yep, but I'm after a good start. So this is the most I've bred in the 2 years. So I'm just kind of focused on. I've got some good cracker chicks, and I'm just kind of focused on that to keep them going. But
good.
What about yourself? You bred many this year?
But this year's ring, like 5. 80 last year. I missed 1 or 2 on the transition period. I probably missed about 5 actually, with no rings. And then for some reason I was looking through the nest boxes and I was like, oh, hardly anything happening now. Just my luck when the rings finally arrived. So a lot of the pairs I've taken down because they're not really. They've done their breeding, some of them. So I take the foot off the gas a little bit in the winter, to be honest.
When do you
keep going?
Yeah, when do you start breeding?
Technically, I never really start or stop. I just judge by when the birds are ready. So if I'm looking in the flights and there's a pair rearing to go, then I'll give them a cage if I've got a cage. So in the winter, there's less of them rearing to go, and in the summer, there's more. But I never really stop. But it's a bit of a pain in the arse for cleaning in that way. But you can do it, you know.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to breed all year round this year, just to kind of keep, because I kind of see the lockdown getting any better and I kind of get us to do anything. So I think I'll just kind of break some pairs, put up other pairs and see kind of how summer breeding goes, and then kind of judge it for next time.
But it can't help, because it can mean that instead of going 1 generation per year, it means you can sometimes get like 5 generations in 4 years, or you can maybe even get a bit more out of them, you know. So you do progress a little bit faster if you're. Just depends on when the birds are ready, and that depends on all your management of your food, like we're doing tonight, and everything else.
I guess, George, I'm on my 5th breeding season in 3 years.
There you go. Yeah.
But that's partly because I've got 2 sides to the shed. I'm using both sides, so I can clean up one side and then set it running, break down the other side, clean it up and set it running again, and they can overlap. Equally, it's because I've got too many birds and too many varieties. So I have to go in fits and starts. So, the crested have all been down. I've got enough crested now. They're all being broken up, but it's the recessives' turn now, and it just flows. It'll be the fallows after the recessives. So, the breeding season for each variety is I guess, a 4-month block that's different to the other one. So, but
so
I'm not bothered about showing or rings. So
it's actually a really good point. So something I wanted to put into whenever I finish the app is basically you can set an alarm and an alert that if you've a hen or a cock that's been in your flight for 6 months or a year and hasn't been used, it'll tell you this hen XYZ. We had that for the cattle and the pigs, obviously. So this hen isn't being used, and therefore go and have a look at it. Is it never in condition, or is it you just never choose it because it's crap? Maybe it's time to move it on if it's good enough to breed, or if it's not good enough to breed, then get rid of it.
I guess my logic with the multiple seasons too, George, is if we're looking at some of my birds I've been breeding down as young as 6 months, which perhaps I would say is a bit on the young side. But if you're looking at 8 months being reasonable, if you're looking at breeding once a year, you've just wasted 4 months, haven't you?
Yeah.
So for me, when they're cycling through, the bunch of crests that I've got now that have just come away, which are great, they're all ready to go out to normals next time around. The next breeding season for the crest is in 8 months' time. But what I need to do is to get 4 months of recesses in and 4 months of fallows in, and then the crests go again. So I guess it's trying to optimize your output, but having more than one space you can get disease break between it and clean them down is very important. If you're using bog standard wooden cages in one set area, that's a pain. The wire cages make it so easy for hygiene.
Yeah, I remember some really good advice I got when I started was from Richard Miller, and he said to me, he pulled out a young bird out of the flight, and he said, "This is 6 months old," and he showed me the iris ring around the eye, and he said, "She's ready to go. Just pair them up straight away if this is the case." And I keep an eye on them, and if the hen is bouncing and ready, and you look and there's an iris ring, I put her in a cage, and it's only once bit me in the arse. The rest of the time, it's always been fine and good, and that's I think it's.
Shall we resume the talk, because we've had 10 minutes, and I think most people are probably back, aren't they? I'll share my...
Kevin, can I just have a quick word with the audience, because I didn't do it earlier on, about the chat button. If anyone wants the chat, so you get your cursors, the little arrow, and put it down the bottom of your screen, you'll see some choices down there, and one of them is called chat. You press the chat button, you'll see a big white thing comes up, and all what a load of us have been chatting about tonight. So, for instance, if you want to ask Kevin any questions later on, send me a private message, and I'll either call you up to ask it, or I'll ask it on your behalf if you wish. Just get the chat thingy up, whatever it's called, and you can see what's going on there. Sorry, Kevin, carry on, sir.
That's okay. I was just going to say, if there's anyone who has French as their first language, it's not going to be a cat that appears. This is a chat, just so they're aware. Nobody's got that. It's too late.
No, I didn't get that either.
Let's chat. Never mind.
All right.
Okay, we're back to reality, hopefully. Okay. Again, this is Waltham again. This is research that the BS were involved in endorsing, I guess. But going back to this paper, if we're going to create a supplement that we're going to try to use to balance out these deficiencies, I need to know what budgies eat. This goes back to some of the chat we had earlier in here as well. And we know if we're feeding that standard diet within the 13 to 14 megajoules per kilo, budgies are going to take probably 8 to 12 grams per day. And the Waltham studies looking at nutrient intake and volume, they went up to 20 grams per day per bird, but they couldn't sustain that after that. So bog standard bird, 8 to 12 grams of seed per At the Waltham Centre, there, at the time of the study, their budgies weighed between 30 and 80 grams, weight of 53 grams. So their average intake of seed was 23% of their body weight. And if we go back to some of the other papers here looking at guidelines, I guess, then on this particular paper, it was taking 26% of body weight. So on that basis, it seems fairly consistent that, a quarter of your budget's weight is going to be what they're going to eat as seed under normal circumstances to maintain themselves. And if your budget is weighing 60 to 80 grams, that's 60 to 20 grams of food intake. And that's probably, realistic. That's how much seed they're going to eat in a day, and that will sustain. So good. That gives me a very good idea of what they would be eating at a maintenance level. But these guys did feeding trials as well. Brilliant. Why did we never know this? Why was it never told to us? This is just one. This is very, very pointless. But the fact of the matter is when they were looking at the consumption of feed and looking at percentage of body weight, funnily enough, the more the birds ate, the fatter they got. So that obviously is. You can see there's a big variation in voluntary food intake here in birds.
Kevin, sorry to interrupt. Can you drop your mic down?
Indeed, is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot that. Thank you, Ian. Okay, so if we move on to, I guess what I want to look at now is I want to look at formulated diets, because we mentioned there's lots of people looking at what do birds eat normally, what do chickens have, what specific formulated diets exist out there, because obviously these diets are designed to be the whole food source for our birds. And that's brilliant. That saves us a whole mountain of work. So if we're looking at Harrison's here, for example, which is a pelleted feed that I'd be recommending if I was to recommend a pelleted feed for your budgies, this is complete nutritionally. This is balanced. So this composition is what I want my diet to be for maintenance. And they give a lovely product list of what's in their food. And the main ones we're looking at here is we're looking at protein levels in their food is 15%. Well, we were pitching in around that for the seed. Calcium is 0.61, which arguably is a bit lower because we wanted 0.85. And then we've got vitamin D and vitamin A values here in terms of values per kilo of food as well, to give us a ballpark for what they would be considering for maintenance for your pet parrot. And what hand rearing diets? A hand rearing diet is designed to grow a parrot. Okay, we have a hyacinth macaw on the front here. Okay, maybe slightly different protein requirements and things, but the fact of the matter is this is designed as a sole food for rearing chicks. So we're pitching in for chick rearing here. We want 20% protein. We've got 7,200 international units of vitamin A here as well. So this gives me an idea of what protein requirement a growing chick is going to want. That's going to want 20% in its diet. Well, 12% in your seed then is clearly protein deficient. And you can get these, just read the label. It's all there for you to look at and to see. And if we go back onto the Harrisons here, and we're going to look at they do a hand rearing formula as well. So great. What do Harrisons have on their hand rearing formula? Well, their protein is 18%. Their calcium's at the 0.9 where I'd expect, and the vitamin D and vitamin A here again are very comparable to that in the A19. So a lot of these manufacturers are pitching in with very, very similar levels of the main agents we're looking at. They're pitching in around that same percent, 20% protein, 0.91% calcium, and you've got your vitamin D here and your vitamin A. And this is the levels they want for the whole diet, because this is designed as a sole source. Okay. Let's get some egg foods here. Let's go and get some egg food. Have a look at your classical egg foods that you would go out and get there. They're pitching in at 16% protein. Massive amounts of vitamin A, but as we'd said, going back looking previously, amazing amount of plasticity in terms of the amount of vitamin A that the birds will tolerate. We've just got to pitch over the minimum for everybody. But this is 16% protein. So probably not high enough, but we're now getting to that sort of level where we think this is what my chicks need to have. So if we're taking that into trying to bring it back together again, then I want a diet that's got 20% protein across all of it for rearing chicks. And that will obviously also do eggs as well. Whereas for maintenance, I want a diet that's probably pitching in around 12% protein. So that's my deficit. The seed is giving me 12%, but I need 20. So if you're going to be looking at feeding feeds to your birds, if you're going and you're buying a product that has absolutely no nutritional information on that product at all, I cannot make any judgment whatsoever on how much to feed, when to feed it, what to do with it. As far as I'm concerned, if you do not know what is in the food you are feeding, do not buy that product. Okay, this is calcium vitamin D here again, but this is responsible labeling. I want to look and see what it's got. I've got a list of the ingredients. Great, I can now make a judgment call on how useful you're going to be to build into my feeding regime because I can quantify what's in you. And again, just because the birds like it doesn't mean it's any good. Just because a big breeder says, oh, I feed it, my birds eat it, doesn't mean it's any good. Just because Rob loves KFC and ice cream, they might be very tasty, doesn't mean they're good nutritionally. Sorry, Rob. But that is the truth. So what we need to be looking at for our birds is we need to say, okay, if we're going to feed seed and it's bad, we know we've got energy, we know we've got protein, but I've got to have something to add to that that is going to compensate for the vitamin and mineral deficiencies and maybe give them a taster of the diet that I'm going to give them when they are growing and breeding, because then obviously their demands are different than because they're egg laying and they're rearing chicks. So I need 2 supplements here. And what I want is a maintenance supplement that's fed all year round. And then as soon as I start breeding with those birds, as soon as they enter the breeding cage, that needs ramping up to their grower breeder diet. So I need 2 soft foods. And obviously when we're looking at thinking, okay, how long is it going to take a hen to build up the reserves she needs for egg laying? Well, most hens is going to be 2 weeks before they lay. You've got 2 weeks to ramp up that hen's nutrition. That, combined with the stimulation of being with the male in a nest box, probably going to do you. Now, okay, if you have your hens and cocks in separate flights and they're all at separate ages, you can start ramping up the nutrition on the hens beforehand. But bear in mind, if you've got hens sitting in the flight that aren't breeding and you're pushing them on a breeding diet, you're just going to get obese hen birds that are going to have egg laying problems and God knows what else going on, and hepatic lipidosis. So I don't want to be conditioning the hens unless you're going to be going in the breeding cage. And again, if they're hens that feed on your diet, that you feed, that have had that since a baby, they will eat that to ensure their egg quality is good. They will feed it to the chicks to ensure the chick growth is good. And the chicks go, oh, this is what I eat. And they'll do the same for their chicks. We want these birds to be taking this because we've already said this. We know this is a sticky wicket here. We know we're trying to make selective feeders selectively feed on what we want versus missing it. Go back to the Amazon paper. It doesn't work. We've got to try and make it work. And this is the way that we're going to do it. This is again from Waltham Research. This is looking at energy intake of birds at set-in point during the breeding season. To change that for you here, point A is when they're laying the first egg. Point B is when the first chick hatches. Point C is when they've fledged. And point D is when they're weaning. And you can see during that nesting period, that's when they're ramping up that nutrition, when their calorific intake is jumping. And we're going here from 8 to 12 grams, probably the flat line at A and B here per bird, peaking up to 20 when the chicks are growing at optimal size. So this gives us a very good idea now of what amount of feed they're going to take. My next question is given that, if I was to offer a supplement, what sort of amount would I expect them to take? That's the next question we've got to ask ourselves. This is just another little chart here, a lovely chart showing body weight increase in chicks. And again, it's that latter phases of nest box growth, which is massive. Okay, we need to look at the differences between these. I'll just sort of highlight some of these, perhaps I think while we're going with this. The interesting thing is that if you're looking at this, we've got on the Wharton paper looking at glycine, much as it's not in the abstract, you've got to drill down into it a bit here. Their breeding pairs that they're doing for this trial, they had 30 grams of seed offered a day and 30 grams of rearing food offered a day, which is quite interesting. So, you know, ad lib really, we know they're going to eat, a bird will eat 8 to 12 grams of seed. So 30 grams should be more than sufficient for ad lib. And we know that their maximum intake during breeding will probably be 20 grams per bird per day. That's 40 grams. So these are basically offered ad lib. Great, this is quite interesting stuff here. We know, translating across, again, looking at these Wharton papers, it's 8 to 12 grams per day, maximal 20 grams per day. Great, that's really useful information to have as well. And my assumptions when we're looking then at formulating this is you're going to be feeding seed. We know what seed contains. It's probably 75% of your bird's intake. And we're probably going to be getting them taking up to 20 grams of food each per, maximal during rearing. But obviously when we're coming into the start of breeding with egg laying, when we know they're taking the 8 to 12 grams each, well, we're probably going to get away with them saying, okay, they're probably consuming 20 grams of food. 3/4 of that will be seed. So that will be what in essence would be, say, 15 grams of seed. 2 times 8 is 16. I'll live with that, which probably means these pairs we're taking maybe a teaspoon of soft food per pair, 5 grams. So in my head, looking at that nutrient intake during that time period, that's probably a reasonable ballpark. In my head, your supplement at that time being 25% of your bird's intake during breeding is probably realistic. Another little bit here from another paper here. Again, it's Wharton again. The point to take out of this little paragraph here is it must be remembered that these birds are often slow to accept novel foods, and it may take up to 2 weeks before their intake increases to a point where it's of any nutritional value in the diet. That's a complete lie. It's going to be damn set longer than that. This process can be affected by early dietary experience, absolutely. And budgerigars will eat most readily the seeds given to them as chicks. This is why you're breeding your own hens. We're back on the glycine paper again, because there's lots of little hidden gems in here. So these were offered 30 grams of seed and 30 grams of soft food. The average weight was 53 grams. The average food they ate during the breeding period and the rearing period was a ratio of 65 to 35 seed to soft food. Okay, they have failed to mention the total weight of food consumed in this paper. But okay, we know from the other studies coming out of Wharton that those 8 to 12 grams, up to 20 grams maximum. So we know the diet was 35% soft food here. So pitching in with the ballpark 75% seed, 25% soft food during the rearing and breeding period probably is a reasonable ballpark. I appreciate this is ballpark because we're guessing. We're trying to make a round peg fit in a square hole. But we're going to be looking at that sort of amount. So going on to calcium, just an aside here, if we're assuming that the birds are consuming 20 grams of food per pair, we're assuming if you're egg laying, you want 1% of calcium in the total diet. And we know there's some evidence that giving too much calcium can be a bit of an issue in poultry, certainly. So for our calcium, we want 1% of the diet overall. And you've seen from the rearing foods, from the soft foods, and from the pelleted diets, that's what most of the commercial foods are pitching in at as well, around 1%. So we start pulling this together. 3/4 of our diet is going to be seed. There's no calcium. So your soft food is supplying your sole calcium source for egg laying. You need your soft food to have a calcium content of 4% to compensate, because 1/4 of the diet is providing all of the calcium. And if you're going to use limestone flour as your main source of calcium, that's got 40% calcium in limestone flour. You need your limestone flour to be 10% of your soft food mixture to pitch in at the right amount of calcium for your birds. That's the first rule of thumb. Okay, and straight calcium carbonate, brilliant. This is the most concentrated form of calcium you can get, and it's 40%. So knock yourselves out. Cheap as chips works very, very well. 10% of your soft food, you're probably nailing your calcium roughly. And if you go back and look at your commercial egg foods and everything else, again, they're all around the 1% because these are designed to be the sole food source. But we're using this as a supplement as a quarter of the food intake, which is our assumption. So we need to multiply that by 4, okay? Vitamin A, C doesn't have any. We want 2,000 international units per kilo, looking at what other values people have been using. That equates to 8,000 in our soft food. Seed has no vitamin D. We want to pitch in around 1,500 international units. That's 6,000 in the soft food, okay? So we want to multiply our overall diet values by 4 because our soft food is a quarter of the diet. And again, go through, look at your rearing foods, pick up and read the label, start getting these values. You'll see they're all pitching in at a similar level. Egg foods, again, very, very similar level. Moving on to cod liver oil. Cod liver oil is an age-old thing, actually, and if you start strolling through the literature a bit here, certainly it's been added to seed, or historically 20, 30 years ago was recommended to add it to seed. And of course, seed's dehusked. So we know, unless they're getting the oil off the surface coating of the husk before they shell it, it's probably not being adequately absorbed. And again, for me, if you're going to add cod liver oil, get it in your soft food. Cod liver oil is very rich in vitamin A. Brilliant. And if you translate that across and say, okay, how much cod liver oil do I want to give into a kilo of my soft food to get the vitamin A level I want? It's 10 mils per kilo of soft food. Okay, that's a good starting point. If we look at vitamin D content in cod liver oil, again, if we're adding it to soft food and you translate that all across, I need 70 mils per kilo of soft food. Okay, what we do know is there's lots of plasticity in terms of vitamin A. So for me, when I'm pitching in for my cod liver oil, I'm going, okay, I'm concerned about vitamin D here because I've got egg laying hens. I know calcium metabolism is important. So I pitch in with my cod liver oil at my minimum vitamin D requirements, and the vitamin A is within the ballpark. And if we go looking at some of these historic papers again and say, what were their recommendations? Looking at just generally in there, and it's 10 mils per kilo here, 7.5 mils of kilo here. This is adding to top dressing seed, of course, here. But again, if we're looking at soft food being a quarter of that, we've got to multiply that by 4. And these are pitching it at 30 to 40 mils per kilo of soft food. So these would have been a higher level than I'm recommending. But again, they're top dressing seed, and we know that's pointless. The other interesting point, and this is again going back to opinions and validity or not. This is the Waltham paper, so in a very well-respected veterinary journal. Baker, reference number 7, suggested a daily requirement of 0.25 milligrams per bird of vitamin D. Brilliant. And this was equivalent to adding up to 1 ml of cod liver oil per kilo of seed if they didn't have access to sunlight. Brilliant. You know, there's a paper here that is suggesting the daily requirement for a budgie from Dr. Baker. So, I mean, this has to be good, doesn't it? Okay. Shall we find out what reference 7 is? Reference 7, 1990, dangers in vitamin overdose from cage and aviary birds. Now, that's hardly Nature or New Scientist or anything like that, is it? It's a random comment made by a random person who happens to be a vet in cage and aviary birds. There is no credibility to that statement whatsoever. That's like you referencing me for something I've said tonight. There's no credibility for it. I'm just chatting to you. Unless I've actually got a paper that says, here is my paper showing the exact amount of vitamins that I gave to a bird, and here is their blood results and tissue results showing their vitamin D levels. I'm just talking rubbish. So what I'm saying is a lot of what we're doing is I'm trying to pull apart what information we have to come up with something sensible. But the fact of the matter is, do I know? And the answer is, no, I don't. But moving on from vitamin A and vitamin D and calcium, we've got an idea of what we want, and that's the starting point. Let's look at protein. We know we want 20% in the total diet for rearing chicks. We know seed is giving us 12%. We're assuming that's 75% of the diet. You translate that across, and it means this soft food you're giving for rearing, you want that soft food to have 44% protein to get you to the 20% overall for your birds. Okay. So when you're looking at creating this concentrate feed, this soft food, this supplement, okay, you've got to get energy into them. That's certainly point for it. You want it to be palatable and consistent. And part of that is that to try and reduce their ability to pick out bits when they're feeding on it. You want them to take all of it evenly. And obviously you need to train them to eat it. So it's got to be palatable. It's got to try and minimize the risk of selective feeding within it. And they've got to like it and eat it. And this is just looking at some commonly used food products. And again, just go online, you can download the data on them and say, okay, seed, it's 12% protein. That's all seeds bring into this table. It's bringing nothing else. We look at boiled eggs, 12% protein. Well, you know, that's not a surprise, is it? Because we kind of worked out that's what you sort of wanted. Maybe a bit low. Maybe we're pitching more like 16% for egg laying or for rearing. But the fact of the matter is that's not a surprise that a boiled egg is going to have about the right amount of protein that you want as a whole for the whole diet. So a boiled egg is protein deficient. A boiled egg is no better than seed in terms of its protein content. We know if we're using dried mealworms, we've got 15% protein going on here. These aren't bringing anything else, but they're going to bring us a protein hit. This, if we want to make a mixture that's got, well, you're not going to get to 44% protein, but if you want to try or to improve it, you're going to need something that's got more than 44% protein to add to this mix. That's where your mealworms come in. People love carrot. Great, 9% protein. So if I add carrot to this mix, I'm dropping my protein back. Not helping, but I like it. Maybe it's improving palatability, and I'm getting some vitamin A in there as well. Okay, and again, if we're chucking in things like bread or other fillers just to make it up into the right sort of texture that we like, 13% protein. So again, bread is no better than seed in terms of protein content, and negligible calcium either, no vitamin A or vitamin D. So realistically, on this sort of list we've got here is boiled egg is status quo, mealworms is pushing up protein, and your carrot and bread are fairly pointless. But they might improve palatability. And again, if we look at egg food classical composition here, this is again, you know, you can see adding egg food to this just dilutes it all out, because an egg food is designed to be a whole food source, not part of the food source. There's not enough protein in egg food to make any difference. Cod liver oil, as I said, that's going to bring you your vitamin A and vitamin D, but it tastes unpleasant. Some of you will be old enough that you had cod liver oil as a small child. I never did. I was lucky enough to have my vitamin D fortified in milk by Maggie Thatcher, but before that time, you probably had cod liver oil. We know that calcium carbonate is the richest source of calcium we've got here. And you've got things like spirulina powder, whey protein. I've even tried peanut butter, dry peanut butter as a source of protein as well. But, you know, there are other ways we can try and push up protein on there. And obviously the whey protein, which is 80% protein, that does help you push up protein quite significantly. But I think you're going to struggle to get to that 44% you'd love to have. So for me, when I'm looking at complementing the seed, my dried mealworms are pushing the protein for me. The calcium carbonate is bringing in the calcium. Cod liver oil is the A and the D. And everything else I'm adding to this are just fillers or vehicles, improving palatability and consistency. They're just to make the birds take the food. But what I'm after is the mealworms for protein, calcium carbonate for calcium, and the cod liver oil for A and D. You'll notice I'm not focusing on the minutiae here, because I'm looking at the major deficiencies here and trying to balance those out. We know in the products we're feeding here, there are other vitamins present in them as well. And I'm not going to dwell on those, because it's going to be a nightmare to try and focus down to each individual one. It's just too variable. Focus on the big picture, and these things are the bigger picture. Mealworms on the left, whey powder on the right, boiled egg, white bread, cod liver oil, calcium carbonate, carrot, chuck it in the mixer, We've got some spirulina in here as well, actually, but spirulina is okay. They don't particularly like it. It colours it green, so it's very easy to see if the chicks have eaten it, but I've since ditched the spirulina. But the fact of the matter is we're after making a soft food consistency that makes it difficult for them to pick out individual bits, that you're hoping that this is going to have an even coating of cod liver oil, an even spread of the calcium carbonate and everything else, that when they're ingesting it, they're going to be getting all of that, and the protein content is going to be pushed up. So for me, when you're looking at these, if I was going to create a suggested rearing food, which has the protein levels they need for rearing chicks at 20% overall, with the increased vitamin A and D required and calcium, then this is kind of the mix that I'm using for mine. It is deficient in protein. Absolutely is deficient in protein. I can send you this if you want. You can have the more details on the exact percentage, but the fact of the matter is it's very difficult to get a rearing food with 44% protein in it using these sorts of things. You're going to be feeding mostly mealworms and whey powder, and they're just going to want to take that evenly. So so there is a little bit of a hit on that. Equally, as we said, budgies will also survive doing 2 rounds just on seed with 12%. So, you know, even if I'm not getting the 20, but I'm pitching it at 15 or 16 maybe, then, you know, that probably is going to be better than nothing. But I think I would be delusional to think that this is giving me 20% overall with the seed. And then if we're looking at giving a supplementary of maintenance, what I want these guys to do here is to get a flavour for that soft food. But I don't need to be pushing the calcium carbonate so much, because I'm down at 0.85% here because they're not laying eggs. Mealworms and whey powder, they're the main protein sources here. I don't need to drive these birds with protein. I just like them to get a bit of a taste. So they're getting used to it and go, oh, okay, yep, that's grand, yep. And then we can ramp up these components during the breeding season. And obviously then we're sticking with the cod liver oil and eggs as well. So I guess that's what I do with mine. They're on seed, they're having a maintenance supplement, they're having a rearing supplement. That is their nutrition. It is that simple for how I would be feeding mine. I think for me, the final analysis from today is seed has no calcium, has no vitamin D, has no vitamin A. You need to get that into your birds as standard. You're going to use your soft food to get the supplementation on board. You're going to train your birds to eat this food. They're going to be birds you've reared yourself that are used to it. You can provide it all year round. And when it kicks in for breeding season, you're going to ramp up that protein in the diet overall from 12% to 20%. And I don't care what you're feeding in your soft food. I suppose the answer is whenever I see people creating soft food, and I know there are some very prominent breeders that, you know, they have 50 things going into their soft food. And you know, if you're adding something to your soft food, the first question is, why are you adding it? The second question is, do they actually need that? And the third question is, do you know how much you need to add to get within the ballpark for what you want? And if you don't know any of those answers, don't put it in your food. John, over to you.
That last bit wasn't pointed at me, was it?
If the cat fits, John. I know. To be honest, you're following another significant breeder's soft food recommendation that contains about 500 things. Bearing in mind the one that I'm feeding just contains 7, and none of them are a commercial product.
Yeah, I mean you're right in many ways. I mean I do know what I'm feeding, but I have tried. I've looked at all the ingredients and all the percentages, and I would need to be a top mathematician to work it out, and I'm not. All I would say is that I took the advice of a top breeder, who you could say is certainly one of the most successful in the country, if not the world, and I copied what he did. And then over the last 4 years, I've tweaked it, and I've tweaked what he feeds. And now I've got a very similar feed regime. but I've tweaked it for various reasons that I can't tell you offhand, and those reasons don't include because it's got this in and it hasn't got that in. There's a few things, like, for instance, this breeder's mixture included Frosties, Kellogg's Frosties. And I'm thinking, do I want to be feeding my birds sugar, pure sugar? And
you do, because they're great, John.
Well, they might be great, and I have them every morning, with full cream milk.
That explains a lot, John. Actually, that explains your hyperexcitability, definitely.
Yes, and the size of my stomach, and also, so what I did.
And your diabetes.
I haven't got diabetes yet.
Okay, good.
Anyway, I haven't got there yet. But what I did do was I stopped the Frosties and I brought in something else to give me the folic acid that I was looking for, and also some of the B vitamins. Well, maybe.
Was it Cocoa Pops?
They're full of sugar anyway. No, it was a product by Osmond's, a horrible green liquid that stains all your feeders and your water feeders. And it's by Osmond's. I can't think what it's called offhand, but I know it when I look it up. And it's full of various vitamin Bs, which I really like the look of. And also it was lots of folic acid. So that's what I put in instead of Frosties. And there's lots of other products that I did the same.
So, question for you, John. Is folic acid an essential nutrient for budgies, and are they deficient in it?
Pass. But all I would say is that this breeder was feeding it, and so I wanted to carry on feeding it, but in a different way than they were. I didn't want the addition of pure sugar at 20% or whatever.
So what I'm saying basically, John, is you followed the advice of a very senior breeder whose soft food mix is very widely utilised by lots of people. Yes. And they don't have a clue why they're making it or what they're putting it in for. It hasn't been analysed. They're not nutritionists. They have no idea what they are doing.
No, but they breed some of the best birds in the country, and if not the world.
They might very well do.
And that's
not denying that.
What matters more than me knowing what's in it.
Does it?
Yeah, it does.
I'm fairly sure there are some pet breeders out there that can breed some beautiful pet budgies that have a very good diet, but they don't show them. And as we said, birds will get away with rearing 2 rounds just on seed, which we know is awful.
Yes.
I can have the best birds on the planet and rear them on seed then, and have an awful diet and pretend it's good because it's what's made my birds brilliant.
Well, I'm not sure long term they would.
This goes back to people's opinions being valid or not valid.
Those birds wouldn't stand up on the show bench, I'm afraid. I don't think so anyway. Those ones you were feeding, on seed alone for 2 rounds, I'm afraid those birds are not going to stand up on the show bench, and they're not going to rear good chicks long term. No,
but that's exactly what I've said in the talk, John.
Exactly. That's my reason for not feeding just seed.
John, may I ask Kevin a couple of questions?
Go for it, Ian.
Go for it.
Right, okay, yes, for many, many years, 30 years ago, protein was considered to be essential, and it was known even then, and you're talking about the 80s, 90s.
I'm not old.
Yeah, old. Enough protein in seed, right? One of the supplements I add to my soft food, which I start with a basic egg food mix, right? Whether it's Versilago, but it could be any of the ones, which are full of vitamins, minerals. And the thing that I've added is wheat germ, which is 30% protein.
Okay.
And that's available from Holland & Barrett.
Yep.
If you're lucky, you buy 1 bag, you get 1 bag free. And I had that.
You said 30, didn't you?
30 grams
30.
100 grams.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so 30 grams content is 30 grams of protein per 100 grams, so it's quite high in protein, and that I've added. But there's also a danger, and I want your view, and I found there's a danger in too much protein, because when you feed too much, the birds get quite hyper, and I found that they were wanting to go back to breed the second round before the youngsters were out the nest, and lots of birds being chucked down and attacked. So
I think there is an element of nutrition on that, Ian. I think you're right there. What factors make a bird's too fit, if that makes sense? because obviously, you know, the rearing conditions we've got them in is abnormal. Your chicks normally fledge, and they're not normally right under the parents' faces and begging for food every 30 seconds. They're not normally right there. So, you know, there is an element that could be considered irritating. But the fact of the matter is we don't not quite sure what diet conditions them. We know protein conditions them for breeding. That's absolutely true. And maybe too much protein would make that difference. I guess if we're looking at the rearing foods and the commercial foods out there, and we're talking, you know, with the best in the world, we're talking looking at brands like Harrison's, looking at brands like Versalager and this sort of type thing, massive international companies that have done extensive nutritional research and nutrient analysis of their products. They're pitching in for the whole diets for these cases, 16, 18, 20% protein. So for your whole diet, Ian, if you're pitching at that, if your birds are taking lots of groats, let's suggest, you've got 14% there, okay? This means your soft food maybe needs to be more like in the 30% mark. I'll have to do a bit of math in my head in a minute, but the fact of the matter is it's unlikely we're going to get too much protein, but a 30% product adding into your basic 16%, which you're going to have in your egg feed that you're using as a base, which is fine, that is going to help dramatically. But I don't think I will be blaming the amount you're adding of that or pushing it too hard, because we're making the assumption they're only eating a quarter of this. So, you know, I'm not particularly fussed. You know, like I said, I've had them on, you know, I never knew that dried peanut butter was a thing. It was an American imported product. Like, my God, had to be an American product. Of course it did. The birds had it for a few weeks. They ate it. I don't know. I wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole. But the fact of the matter is we do need to look at raising protein above the standard egg rearing foods. And I don't mind what it is. I don't mind what you feed, because we're all guessing.
Yeah.
I suppose what I'm looking for is to say, I'm choosing to feed this because it's got 30% protein. I've looked, and I know I want to get more protein into my birds, and that's what I'm doing. I've had a little bit of a think of how much I want to add and what I want to do. And that's the best we're going to get, I think, in the circumstances. And that's fine.
I had 2 years of feather plucking, and I cut down the protein, and the following year and this year, no problem.
So how much did you cut your protein? What were you doing before then that you're not doing now then, Ian?
I've reduced the amount of wheat germ that goes in with the egg food mix, which has already got protein enhanced in it anyway. I use sweet corn with salt and sugar. So that's adding something different. You didn't mention salt and sugar. I think birds need salt. They love to go for salt. And I use carrot, which gives vitamin A. But a second question for you, right? You mentioned no green food. I feed a lot of, they also get herbs. They get particularly bay leaves, and they go in the aviaries and they go in the cages as well. I cut it down when I'm breeding in the actual breeding cage, but and they get rosemary, sage. I grow it in the garden, so I just cut it fresh most of the time, and I've got dried I can use, but I find fresh. They love fresh herbs. What goodness is there in fresh herbs, and also, if you like, in giving greens?
Okay, so definite plus for all of that, Ian. The reason I haven't focused on it tonight is it's time constraints, I guess. But what we do know, when you're looking at fruits, vegetables and fresh greens, the moisture content of those products is very high. What that means is their inherent energetic value, or if you break it down into their percentage of the diet. So in other words, you know, if you were eating dried Cheerios and this was your diet, and you said, oh, you know what, I'm going to eat some fruit as well, I'm going to have an orange. There's so much water content in that orange, although the volume might be quite large, its impact in terms of percentage of the diet from a nutritional point of view is negligible. Okay, so in other words, if you're feeding a diet that is hitting the ballpark and you're going, oh, I'll give you some fruit and veg on top, you're increasing the variety, you're increasing stimulation, foraging, you're increasing water intake. There probably is some extra vitamins and minerals going through there as well, but it is a small impact on the overall diet because it's not calorie dense, if that makes sense. Do you understand what I'm after there? So,
don't you think that youngsters, you need to get much more, youngsters growing are mainly water, 80% water. So you need to get lots of water and moisture into them through whatever means you can.
Yes, I mean, we certainly said that you know that they don't need to drink water, but we're talking adults here that are at maintenance here. We're not talking growing individuals or breeding. So I think all of these things that you're doing are great, but I wouldn't rely on them and say, oh, I'm using this as a special nutrient source, or I'm using this as a special no, you're not. You're giving foraging and stimulation and water and some extra bits and pieces. But we still need to have that basic diet that's covering those bases to that. But certainly when you look at the complete pellets that people are feeding to the pet parrots, for example, the recommendation is that those complete pellets are 80% of the diet, 20% is fruit and veg, because the fruit and veg is so water content heavy compared to, say, a pelleted feed that's got, say, maybe dry matter of 90%. Much as it's 50% of the volume, the fruit and veg is only really 10% of the overall nutrition of that bird. So that sort of thing doesn't deviate or alter a concentrate feed much. Does that make sense? So knock yourself out with that. Just make sure it's stuff that's safe, that the birds can eat, that it's not avocado and it's not, you know, anything else like that. And that's fine. My birds get leftover basil plants that we get from Sainsbury's, and they destroy them. They love them. They do all sorts of things with them. They have or anything that the children reject, fruit rise, straight in there. I mean, I had one hen that I ended up getting in and catching and treating for trichomonas, only to suddenly dawn on me that the stupid bird had been bathing in pear all day long and actually hadn't been vomiting. You know, this is all fine, but don't be under the illusion it's a major part of the diet. It's foraging, it's stimulation, it's supplementation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Very good talk. All right,
Kevin, I've got something to ask you or to bring up. Which I hope you'll not throw at me the fake news bit, but over the last 3 years, I should say for 2 years ago, during the show seasons, Nicola and I found that our show teams were hard to get out and in condition, and that was because they were dropping flights, wing flights and tails too often. And basically I hope I did work out what it was, and I put it down to the fact that I was feeding them the same soft food as I was feeding all my breeding birds during the show season. And so I stopped giving it to them apart from 1 or 2 days a week. So for 5 days a week, they would get the basic seed mixture, and then at weekends they'd get a more high protein diet. And by doing that, they kept their tails and their wing flights longer, and it was easier to get them out in condition. So can I ask you if that makes sense to you?
Yes and no, John. First things first is you've kind of done what I've suggested anyway in a slightly different way, in that we know they have an increased protein requirement for molting, but it's not much. Okay, budgies have much more food than they had before, so maybe that's a bigger impact. But what I've suggested is that you rein back your protein content, but you feed soft food with a lower protein content on a daily basis. What you've done basically said, you know what, I'm not going to feed it for 5 days. I'm just going to give it during the weekend, but I'm going to stick with a higher protein level in it. The net effect over the week is the same, but I guess from my point of view, I'm trying to habituate the birds to taking it on a daily basis. It's repetitive exposure. This is part of your normal diet. You take this on a daily basis, but the protein content is something I'm going to decide on depending on the reproductive and life stage of those birds, if that makes sense. So for me, I'd rather you cut the protein down in your soft food, but fed it daily versus doing it once a week. But you've achieved the same objective in just a slightly different way. But I don't want to untrain my birds from taking it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, but so you would understand the fact that I cut down the protein, which then stopped them throwing these feathers out. And in my mind, they were throwing the feathers out and wanting to produce new ones. Does that feel right to you? Is that what was happening?
Speculation, John.
Yeah, I thought so. But anyway, that's the way it works. So, you know, fake news or not, that's my experience.
You made right dietary choice there, but we'd be guessing to say the impact of that.
Yeah.
But your choice of changing your soft food rate was bang on.
Okay. Where are we going from here? Have you carrying on, or do you want some questions and stuff?
I'm happy for questions. I've done what I wanted to do for tonight for you guys. Go
Wonderful.
ahead with questions. It's open debate time, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a few on the chat, but I've got a few that I've been writing down for various people, and other people have put them to me. So the first one is Budgies and the onion family. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, don't feed them.
Simple as that.
Yep.
In the onion family, of course, we've got garlic, haven't we? And that is a big addition in many people's diets. So is that one of the ones that we can feed in the onion family, or we should not feed that as well?
I think it goes back to what Ian was saying, is when you're adding these things to that, why are you adding it to your diet? And this goes back to, I suppose it comes back to palatability, doesn't it? Does it enhance palatability of that product? Are the birds taking it because it's got a bit of garlic in there? I think the only reason you'd want to feed garlic is for palatability, and it probably isn't going to work because it's not going to improve palatability. So there is no real logic in feeding it. And as Ian said, if you're feeding other bits of herbs and they love them, that's great. The whole point is cod liver oil is not tasty. Calcium carbonate is not tasty. You'll know that if you've had to drink gallons of Gaviscon or any other products that are calcium based. These are not tasty things that they would necessarily want to eat. So we need to make this soft food palatable. We need to train them to take it. And if you're going to use herbs and veg and you're going to use sweet corn, or you're going to use carrot, or you're going to use peas, or whatever else you're doing, you've got to look at the nutrient components of those and see what impact it's having overall on the mix. But whatever your birds are trained to taking, I don't particularly mind. For me, looking at the ballpark, I'm interested in protein. I'm interested in calcium. I'm interested in vitamin A and vitamin D. The other bits and pieces, the frilly bits around the side on it, iodine as well I'm interested in as well, which I kind of glossed over tonight, but again, that's been mentioned elsewhere. But, once you're nailing those main deficiencies or trying your best to compensate for that, the extra bits are all extra bits, and I don't mind. If your birds like garlic, fine. If you want to give them oregano, fine. But don't think you're doing something amazing by doing it.
Okay, thank you. Ian mentioned about giving fresh herbs from the garden, and it's something, I grow a lot of fresh herbs, but I'm not allowed to feed any of them because my garden is full of slugs. Now, slug slime will kill a budgie in less than 24 hours, and they crawl all over your herbs. So what's the answer? Is it I have to buy them from Sainsbury's? What's your thoughts on the garden herbs that have had slugs and snails crawling all over them, leaving a slime that will kill your budgies?
I think you've got to be happy that your food source is of sufficient quality, haven't you, for your birds? And I think supermarket produce is the way to go, to be honest with you, to guarantee quality. But what you are dealing with then is you are having things that have been commercially grown in large quantities for volume and for the human market. So your nutrient composition of a tomato, let's say, for an example, that you've got from Tesco's, possibly is different to an organic tomato, for example. So certainly if you want to increase the calcium content of herbs and plants and stuff, you've got to add limestone flour to the soil to do that. And those of you from a farming background will know that's fairly standard practice as well for certain things as well.
So you might add that to the soft food.
John, well, slugs don't generally like herbs. Slugs generally don't like herbs, and if you've got a problem, slug pellets.
Yeah, right, which is another problem. But I'll tell you what slugs do like is a dandelion. And I'm telling you what, they love a dandelion, and that's the best way of killing your birds, is to give them a dandelion out of the garden.
No, they would like them, I agree.
Absolutely. Anyway, next question, Kevin.
Ever thought about, just 2 seconds, have you ever thought about washing the herbs before you give them?
Well, yes.
Listen, I was waiting for that, and I'll tell you now, George, I'll tell you what, go and get hold of a slug, and then try and wash off the slime off your hands. It don't come off. You've got to scrape it off, boy. I'm telling you what, it don't come off no matter how much fairy liquid you put on.
Getting
It
really
ain't coming
passionate,
off.
John. You're really passionate about your slug slime there.
I thought he was going to start bathing the slugs to try and stop them being greasy to make them feel happier in his garden then for a minute.
Cost me 2 of my best birds last year. Bloody dandelion with slug slime on it. 2 of my best birds.
I've never actually tried it, but does slug slime actually kill budgies? Is it just a myth? I mean, I don't really know anything about it.
Ask Kevin.
Well,
I know a lot of people that hate slugs for that reason. I never researched it myself. I might have a little dabble and a look and
what's
see.
in the slug slime? Yeah, what is in slug slime so that we can see what's toxic and not?
Toxicity.
Yeah, but
there are lots of animals that eat lots of plants that have had slugs on them. There's lots of animals that eat slugs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Chickens eat slugs, and sometimes budgies are chickens. That's what I learned.
Sometimes. They're also sometimes not chickens. They're really annoying.
Not when you talk to Kevin, they're not. Anyway, next question. Avocados. What about them? I mean, there's certain fruits we can't give our birds.
Toxic. Okay, do not feed avocados.
What else?
Bacon, caffeine, chocolate, high salt.
Okay. All right, it's a good question, but you know we're always told feed these fruits. So I mean, it just goes to show, doesn't it? There's a fruit that we really should not feed. So everyone, listen. Avocados is a no. I've got another one here. Apricot and apple seeds. What about some of these things which I'm told are no-nos, Kevin?
Well, yeah, you wouldn't be feeding the seeds anyway. You want to be feeding, you'd be feeding the flesh of the fruit, and that would be fine. They're not
maybe apple seeds. Sorry to interrupt.
They're not going to get into an apricot seed in a hurry, are they?
No, but apple seeds they could easily if you just chop the apples up and chuck it in your oven.
I've never seen that as a problem.
Yeah, that is a no for everyone that is listening. Right, okay, on to some other questions. Someone's brought up, there was something earlier on that mentioned cockatoos, cockatiels, and corellas. I always thought a corella was a cockatoo.
Yes, they're same family.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. Anyway, I didn't know if there was any reason. It was on one of your papers earlier on that I just saw, and it just looked wrong. Thinking. Anyway, so that's
they're all cockatoos.
That's what I thought. Budget. What have I got? What someone sent me here. Budget while drinking or not? Waterhole. Yeah. So budgies in the wild, if they're in a desert environment, presumably they know where the odd water hole is. But I'm thinking surely in the desert they're not going to get enough water out of the dry seeds. There won't be any green plants to eat. So is it water holes that they sort of find every now and again?
I guess it comes down to moisture content of seeds as well, and I suspect, being honest, the moisture content of any plant material is variable depending on the season that you're dealing with and growth and things. This goes back to sprouting seed as well, John, because obviously that massively pushes up the moisture content.
That was my next question.
So that is variable dependent on the season. Certainly we know from some of the reptiles, for example, they will vary their intake of plant material based on its water content. And they reach a certain point where they know if they continue to eat that plant, it's going to cost them more water to excrete the sparse protein than it would be getting from the plant in the first place, at which point they stop eating it because it's going to make them dehydrate. So yes, there is a lot of variation in water content of plants. I think that the point that we should be making here, as much as we know the citizens are very, very good at water conservation, and that means if the water is tainted, I ain't going to drink it. Whether that be a medicine or whether that be a supplement, they're not going to drink it, particularly if you're offering it one day, because go on, I won't drink today. Tomorrow I'll just drink some fresh water. Mine have fresh water all the time. There's nothing tainting it. They can drink that all the time that they want. But the fact of the matter is they obviously choose to drink, and just because they're able to withstand dehydration, there's no need to test them. Not all natural behaviors are good, if that makes sense. And I always sort of say to, people say, with the rabbits we've got, we don't chuck a fox in with the rabbits once a week just to test your pet rabbit to make sure it's exhibiting natural behavior, because we perceive that to be bad. We want it to exhibit good natural behaviours. So just because birds are very good at avoiding water sources and coping without water sources doesn't mean to say we shouldn't offer them. But what it does mean, because they have that capacity, is the moment you try and put something in the water, they just go, nah, I'm not having any of that. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to live off metabolic water until you give me something that isn't tainted. And that was, I guess, the water point in context of this was, in water supplementation is fairly pointless. Now, that said, we don't know that. And certainly that's on my list of things to do once COVID version 2 has finally decided to the good old, I saw something on Facebook about the British COVID, the best, most infectious COVID in the world. That's what Brexit's all about.
Well, all the Brexiteers should go out and get COVID
Go and get our COVID. It's the best in the world. Nobody else is more transmittable. But the fact of the matter is, once that's gone, that is part of the plan, is to start looking at some of these in water supplements and say, okay, much as I've gone through and said cod liver oil and soft food's the way to go, I don't know that. Nobody has actually physically looked at vitamin D levels in Budgerigars versus cod liver oil in seed versus cod liver oil in soft food versus UV light exposure versus putting calcium supplement in the water once a week, every day for the week. We've got no ballpark to say which is the best way forward for absorption of these products to have the net effect that you want. That's on the list in the next 2 years. It's just COVID has kind of kiboshed that. But that was something I would really love to get back to you guys and say, okay, the best way of getting calcium and vitamin D into your birds is this route.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned light as well, for vitamin D. But there are a lot of other seeds, aren't there? Like pumpkin seed, for instance. So it'd be interesting to find out, what's got the highest, whatever, from the cod liver oil to the pumpkin seed, other seeds as well. It'd be a good one to look at, wouldn't it?
I mean, to be honest, even if you were looking at just one form of supplement or one different approach, there's so many emulations that you could make on this. You could spend 20 years going through looking at differences. I think for me, vitamin D is an easy one to target because we can test for blood vitamin D quite easily. In other words, if I want to test a bird for vitamin A, I need a gram of liver. Okay, to get an idea of vitamin A status of a bird. So that bird has to die and give me its entire liver for me to actually have a decent attempt at quantifying the vitamin A status of that bird. I suppose to some extent, if you looked at cod liver oil and said, okay, this is an age-old thing that we've done, we know it works in people because, you've all had it spoon-fed to you as small children, depending on your age. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know. If I put cod liver oil on seed and run it, it may be our vitamin D content in the budgies is negligible difference, which means it's not having any effect. It may be it does have an effect when it's added to a soft food that they're trained to eat. I suppose at least if you've got an impact on these that we can say, okay, this route is having an impact on vitamin D, then you could arguably say, well, okay, it must be being absorbed then for the vitamin D to have an effect. Let's hope the vitamin A is being absorbed as well, if that makes sense. Whereas if they're not picking up any of the vitamin D from it, the argument could be that, well, they're probably not picking up anything from it. So, but we don't know that. Nobody knows that. And all the manufacturers are just lying when they're telling you their product is amazing because they don't actually know. And that is the point that we will be looking at that once I'm in a position that I can start getting some test groups up together.
Yeah. I agree and disagree with you, Kevin.
Sorry?
Can I agree and disagree with you?
Go ahead.
Right, because I agree with the fact that putting supplements into water, birds can not drink their water. And I went away from doing just that, except for one thing. I put once a week, Avid Cleanse, for 2 days with calcium in it. And with the birds I'm breeding and the breeding cage, and I watch how the levels go down. And the levels go down the same. Because like you were saying earlier, you get your bird used to eating certain types of food, the hens, and if they like it, they will feed it to the youngsters. So I haven't found that putting calcium into the water, the birds don't drink the water. They do drink the water.
I think, Ian, I suppose the two things that are going through my head, which again we've gone through tonight, is variability in what of water they're going to drink each bird. So one bird might drink 2 meals a day, one bird might drink 4. It's entirely their choice. That might vary from day to day, but you're absolutely right, Ian, that much as I'm saying, you know, anything that taints the water is going to put them off. The question is what does? Does calcium product A, is that more palatable? Do they drink more of calcium product A in the water, and does it have a greater impact on their blood vitamin D levels than calcium product B? And if I give it to them once a week, is that having a greater or lesser impact than if I gave it to them daily for the whole week as well?
You can't give it to them daily anyway, because you can overdose on calcium, can't you?
Yeah, but if I gave it less every day and they couldn't selectively drink on one day and not the next, that might be a more effective way of doing it.
Possibly.
But do you see what I'm saying? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm agreeing and disagreeing with you because I don't know.
No.
I suspect it's no good, but we don't know, and I'd love to find out.
Now that would be
that's on the list.
That would be a very interesting thing to find. That'd be a very interesting thing if we could find out, for a start, whether it is possible to overdose on calcium, because you know some people say it is, some people say it's not. So it would be lovely to find out the truth, whether overdosing on calcium is true or not.
What you're talking about, John, though, really is you're talking about vitamin D toxicity there.
Am I? Well, that was another question.
The birds are going to need the vitamin D to absorb the calcium in the first place. We know from the poultry studies that over 1.2% has reduced growth rate in the growers. So yes, you could, but you'd need to have the vitamin D in excess to absorb too much.
But that is so cheap, it's unbelievable. I don't know if you know, but pure vitamin D, if you buy it, you only need 2 drops per 1 litre of water. It costs less than a fraction of a penny to fill up a litre of water with the amount of vitamin D needed to make the calcium work, apparently.
But John,
what vitamin D are you using, John?
I'd have to go and get the pot, but it is pure like vitamin D. So do you want me to go and get it?
I suspect what you've got, John, isn't what you think you've got.
Possibly.
Because you've got a lot of the vitamin D products out there are either cholecalciferol or hydroxycholecalciferol. They're not the metabolically active vitamin D. And if they're not the metabolically active vitamin D, the bird has to convert them to metabolically active vitamin D. And that's a different scenario from giving straight metabolically active vitamin D in the water. So it does depend on the product. But again, we don't know how effective that is. That's something that can very easily be quantified once we've got that. But I guess the issue then you've got to, and as you said, Ian, you know, I could go out there now and I have a very good idea of what is the most popular calcium supplements that budgie people are feeding, which would be the first on the choice to be tested. But, you know, I could find 10 in water calcium products, put them at 10 recommended levels daily, once a week, every other day, doing it just one, you know, every day of the week. And then you could say, great, before you know it, I've got 20, 30 different groups of budgies having different concentrations and different days of in water calcium supplementation, checking their vitamin D levels, just on trying to work out what is the best way to do that. There's so many permutations here, and that's just, you know, just looking at one thing. So there is this work just hasn't been done.
Right. Okay. I've hopefully got something I can just show you. I don't know if that's the one I use. We'd have to look it up, wouldn't we? Google it.
Just says D3, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on. So,
John, the calcium that I use has vitamin D with it to help the birds absorb. So hopefully, if the manufacturer's got it right, it will work. Come on, guys, I'll shut up. You give Kevin some more questions.
Right, go on, Kevin. So what's wrong with that? I mean, you know, I thought I was doing the right thing giving D3. So does that not make our calcium work?
It's a question of what they mean by D3, John. Vitamin D3 is cholecalciferol. you've got 25 hydroxycholecalciferol, which is normally marketed as 25 D3, and then you've got 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, which is normally marketed as 125 D3. So what you've got there is a D3 precursor, which the bird will choose to metabolize to active vitamin D if it wants to. That's why that's cheap.
Right. I mean, it's not for nothing. But, you know, that I couldn't use up in probably 10 years. But anyway, I won't keep it that long. So
hopefully it's going to be viable that long.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm only going to keep it probably, you know, use it for a year and throw it away. It's so cheap, I'll buy another one. So will that help my calcium work better? Oh,
yes.
Good.
Yes. But yes.
Okay.
Go back to the calcium talk. It's all on the calcium talk that I did in July.
Thank you very much. The next question is, we talked about it earlier on. Have we got time to quickly talk about sprouted seed and how much better sprouted seed is for our birds rather than dry seed? And if it's a case of it's better, why the hell are we feeding dry seed?
Okay, I can answer that in a few simple answers for you. One, the nutrient density in sprouted seed is less, below the level that we would want for the standard diet for the birds, which is dried seed. Two, you're probably going to have a reduction in protein as well in that. So your sprouted seed is not going to be a maintenance diet. It's not going to work. It's going to work as a supplement. It's going to work for extra moisture. It's going to work for a whole other variety of reasons. It's going to be very, very positive, but it's not your basic diet. And your ORSCO, the next thing you've got on your list, and this boils down to anything and everything for everybody, is it's got to be easy and simple. Sprouted seed is not easy and simple. You're not going to sprout enough to have it as your standard diet. You're not going to do it without getting fungal overgrowth and problems with that as well. Who's got the time to do that? You need things to be simple. There's a reason people feed concentrate feeds to animals and complete dog and cat foods. It's easy, it's convenient, and it's balanced. So much as sprouted seeds are great, absolutely feed them. Again, it's one of those things that you're using to supplement to environmental enrichment to stimulate foraging in the birds, but it's not going to be the bulk of your diet because you're still going to be feeding seed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Next question is, this is from me actually. You were talking about adding things to seed. For instance, let's say we got some seed and we add a little bit of cod liver oil to make it sticky, and then we add something like maybe a probiotic or some calcium to the seed, which appears dry, but these powders will stick to it. How much is the budgie going to take on his tongue and take down while dehusking the seed?
The honest answer is probably far less than you think.
Okay. I don't suppose you're going to know a percentage, so it'll be minute then, will it? Yeah.
It's been shown from a medication point of view and from a nutritional point of view on a number of papers that it's just too variable. And I think this is the problem that we've got, is we're trying here to get balanced nutrition, adequate nutrition across birds that are having variable intake of water and of food. They're getting fixated on certain food items and taking what they like. If you said to me, hand on heart, if I was in a position to feed birds an ideal feed, I'd have them all on a complete concentrate feed. I'd have them all on pellets, because I know that's nutritionally sound. They can't selectively feed, the job is done. And I can add the fruit and veg as Ian would want to, or herbs as 10-20% of that intake. That'll be fine. It's not going to impact on that diet. But the fact of the matter is, economically, we're probably not going to do that. And okay, yeah, do it. Convert your birds to it. But you're going to have to convert every bird that comes into your shed. And as soon as you start offering other food sources to them, you can very quickly undo years of effort getting them to take pellets by just suddenly saying, oh, let's give them a millet spray for a bit. And next thing you know, they're just back on the millet again. Yeah. So, the pelleted diets, much as they are ideal, and absolutely that with my veterinary head on, that's what I would be recommending an individual pet owner to do, because they've got one bird, they can do that. It's not going to be cost prohibitive. When you're looking at a large number of birds where you've got to feed them fairly quickly, and you're looking at birds mixing, matching and going through, the dried seed is, I've said it's bad, but it does provide energy and protein for the basic level that you need. We've just got to work out how to try and compensate for that. And hand on heart, we do know that offering a concentrate feed of some sort as a supplement, like you would do for your cattle and sheep and things, can work. We've just got to try and work out the best way to do that and getting product into them. And in my head, having a supplemental feed, or like I say, fortified groats, for example, for fear of saying a brand name, you know, those sorts of things are probably the way forward for trying to balance our diets out more than in water or more than top dressing seed.
Which brings me to another question, which is something I actually do, and that's when I'm soaking my seed initially, I add probably a third more water than is in the bucket in seed. Now, the following morning or 24 hours later, that water has disappeared, which tells me the seed has soaked it up. So what advantage do you see, or is there an advantage? Would it work that when you put the seed in with the water, that you add calcium, probiotics, or anything else that you want, as long as it would dissolve in water, surely that would then finish up inside the seed if the water has gone? And is that a bonus?
Yes.
That's what I thought. It's something I've done, but I've never heard of it before.
But again, we don't have the quantifications for how effective that's being. But yes, absolutely, there is a very sound logic in that.
Other than all those products disappear into the seed because there's no water left, it's gone, which tells me that those products are in the seed. So that's what I'm thinking. That's why I do it. But that's you know, like my videos, you know, where I tread on the dog. That's the way I do it, not the way anyone else does it. But I just wanted to know your thoughts on that. Anyway, you have nothing against that, so we'll go on to the next question. What's the best way of feeding amino acids? Or any particular, make, or what's the best way? We all hear that we need more. How do we feed extra?
If you want to increase the protein content, use your mealworms.
And that's your amino acid mixed in with your proteins. High protein equals amino acid.
Yep.
Thank you. Matt Owens is asked, he feeds growers, whatever that is. I think it's some sort of thing, stuff for quail, some sort of chicken feed or something. He said, is there any advantage in feeding growers to his budget? Do you know what growers is?
If they're chickens, yes. If they're not chickens, less so. We know, as we said, Matt, that you know, the egg composition in budgies is the same as chickens. We said that their tissue composition is the same as chickens. So you could argue a diet that's designed for rapidly growing poultry isn't going to be far off what perhaps you might want for rapidly growing budgie chicks. You'd probably be okay from that. And certainly looking at the studies broadly, that's okay. And we know the calcium content that you'd be feeding to growing poults will be comparable to what you want anyway. It's the egg laying ones you need to miss out on, because for egg laying hens, you're at 3.3% or 3.4% calcium. Some of them up to 3.8, which is obviously far too high for what the budgies want. So we know the growers sort of pellets would probably be okay as a complete feed. Yes, you probably get away with it. But it's the same old story. Your protein content in that is going to be comparable to your egg food that Ian's feeding. It's going to be comparable to what's in the Harrison's food. It's going to be comparable to what's in the rearing food. And if your birds are still taking 3/4 of their diet of their seed, which is protein deficient, you need more than growers' pellets in terms of protein content. Yeah, you're pitching in at 16%, but you probably need a bit more than that. It's probably okay for the growing birds, to be honest, once they've weaned, but you know, yeah, I wouldn't say no, but again, you might be thinking it's being more a benefit than it actually is.
Would this be a little bit like feeding the old chick crumbs and things like that? Is that
chick crumbs tend to be more like 20%. You know, your commercial products for your poultry are very much age dependent. So the bigger the pellet, the less protein you get as they get on. So I think a lot of your growers will be around the 16%, but I think from memory, things like chick crumbs are more like 20. But I think, like I say, it's a question. I suppose what I'm asking for you guys to do is, if you're going to feed something to your birds, think about logically, what does this bring to the table? Why am I adding it to the mixture? And is it something that I know they're deficient in? Is it something that we know is a significant problem? And these are the ones we've covered tonight. Or is it something I think might be a problem? Maybe they're deficient in methionine. How do I know? I'd rather we stuck with the main things that were of concern and dealt with those first, and had a logical reason for inclusion of something in the diet, versus just because so-and-so told me to.
Thank you. You mentioned Harrison's pellets, which is something that I did look at when I was having the odd day of thinking, how can I make my life easier? And I thought, why don't I get Harrison's pellets, whizzy worm down in a blender and add them to my vegetable mix? Now, admittedly, the vegetable mix isn't going to be 16 to 20% protein, so I'm obviously going to be reducing my soft food mix. But what's your thoughts on doing something like that?
No objection to that at all. Certainly, you go back 20 years, I was doing exactly the same with the budgies as well. If you get the sort of superfine or even the hand rearing mix, which Harrison's do, those are the same as the pellets. They're just nutritional. Okay, the hand rearing mix is higher protein content, but the superfine, which is aimed at budgies, is teeny tiny cubes. Brilliant. But again, you've got a diet that is designed as a whole diet, not as a percentage of that diet. So whichever way you look at it, you're still going to be deficient. And yes, the content of Harrison's as a complete diet is not that different. Okay, as an adult maintenance diet, it's lower. If you choose their rearing food diet, you've got higher protein. If you choose egg foods, there's higher protein. If you choose the hand rearing food that NutriBird would do, or whatever, or Katie, those will have a higher protein content in those. But again, they're designed for growing the chicks on. So much as doing that might help, doing it would train the birds to get used to taking a pelleted food for switching them over, things like that. Again, you need more protein. And trying to pitch to increase your protein in your soft food with something that's got just the level you want isn't going to work. It's got to be more than that to compensate for the deficiencies in seed.
It's a lot of mealworms, a lot of dried shrimp, and a lot of that sort of thing. Okay. Again, we're talking about the foods you add. You mentioned what's that stuff like the NutriBird A19. Mm-hmm. Would there be a great advantage in people adding that to their soft food mix? No. Because again, it's the same. You're pitching at the same level. You need more than that. Brilliant. If you're topping your babies up, absolutely, you do that every second of the day. I think most days, they're topping babies up. I've got a bunch of recessors at the minute. I'm giving a top up to. I think, yes, use it all the time. But again, it's pitching in at the sort of 20% protein mark. And if we're having our soft food is a quarter of their overall intake, I need to be pitching that soft food at around getting towards 40%, and adding something that's 20% to something I want to be 40% doesn't help. We're not going to do it unless we add to the 90 or 80% mealworms, are we? So we can't do that. So we're going to fail to get. I don't think we're ever going to be in a situation that we exceed that 20% goal that we want feeding seed as 3/4 of the diet. But what I'm saying is, if you think in your head, even if they're taking groats and I want my soft food to be 30%, if I'm putting something into that mixture to boost its protein content, it has to have more than 30% in it. Otherwise, it's not boosting the protein content, it's making it worse. And then all it's doing is diluting everything else out. So, when you're looking at products that you want to add, go for something along those lines. And it's obviously got to be palatable. My birds are taking the mealworms grand. They're 50% protein. They seem to be going down quite happily. That obviously makes quite a reasonable shift, because I'm starting off with something that's 50% to shift them up. If you're using something that's 30, using something that's 25, using something that's 20, you're never going to get to the levels that you perhaps want for the peak rearing when they're rearing the chicks. And as Ian said, and Ian, you might actually have a very, very valid point here. And when you're looking at protein amounts, when we're looking at maxing out at 20% protein in the diet, we're talking maximal growth rate of nestlings.
Okay. We're not talking the protein levels you need for birds that are fledging. You're not talking the protein levels you need for egg laying. We're talking max amount of protein that you need for rapidly rearing 4 chicks in the nest. So the protein that a pair of birds need is variable through that cycle. Go back and look at those charts that we went through tonight and look at their feed intake and look at that, and you'll see when during that reproductive cycle you really need to be pushing protein. The trouble we've got, and this is the honest truth, is if you're going into your bird shed and you're going to feed soft food to your breeding pairs, are you in a position then to feed a different soft food for the hens due to lay eggs, then a different soft food for the ones that have got chicks in the nest, and then a different soft food for the ones that have just fledged, and then a different soft food for the birds in the flight? Because that's going to be quite challenging for you to do. So for most people, it's I want a diet for maintenance, and I'm going to try and compensate for that. And I need a diet I'm going to feed to my breeding cages. And it's got to be simple. It's got to try and cover egg laying, rapid growing chicks as well, to cover both those phases. And I appreciate, as Ian's quite rightly said, if your chicks are fledging, they probably don't need that much. But I haven't got the capacity to have different lots of soft food for each individual life stage process during rearing.
Kevin, Pete Smith has asked, what about which brings
cake is no good for them. Do not feed them cake.
No, we'll leave that for gender Rob Hughes. Pete Smith has asked, what about chicks requirements from 4 to 6 weeks and then 6 to 16 weeks? So, yeah, what do they need?
Interesting thing, Pete, when you look at the Waltham studies, is the nutrient intake per bird after fledging drops down. You know, once they've fledged the nest, that rapid growth phase is finished, if that makes sense. So their need for high protein for growth then is much less than it would be when they're being raised in the nest. So at that point, you probably could switch your babies, I guess, onto just some groats and your basic maintenance sort of diet after weaning. You could probably do that. We know they're going to need more because they're molting. I suspect, being brutally honest, because of the style and shape of budgies that we breed now, they will need more protein than a lot of these studies suggest because of feather design and quality, but they're not going to need the same level they would do in rapidly growing in the nest in those first few weeks. I hope that answers the question. Go on.
The reason why I ask, Kevin, is everybody talks about when babies go backwards, when you've first like separated them from the parents and you put them in that baby cage, and they go backwards for a few weeks. And that's why I was interested to see whether we would increase the protein to them in some ways whilst they were in that baby cage.
I suppose you've raised a very interesting point there, Pete, actually, which I've touched on. Point number one is those birds have just weaned, they're just learning how to feed, and in the current enthusiasm for taking chicks away at 35 days, they're probably not feeding adequately. They're still playing around, aren't they? So much as, you know, they're not going to be getting the 8 to 12 grams per bird per day. They probably haven't got quite the idea of doing that yet. So a calorie-dense food that they've had whilst they've been reared that they like, even if it is protein or fat or carbohydrate, it's got to be a positive thing. The second thing on that list as well, of course, is temperature. As we said, budgies are used to, their thermoneutral is from 22 degrees upwards. If you've got a shed with loads of cold air blasting through and it's dropping down in temperature, that baby that's already struggling to work out how to feed all of a sudden has to now, it's left a warm nest outside into the cold. It's got a cold adapt, and you're asking its metabolic rate to shoot up for that reason as well. That's not something you would do to any other animal. So I think there's a variety of reasons why they go back, Pete. One is lack of knowing how to feed adequately, and two is temperature shock. And a higher protein food, even if they don't necessarily need it per se, if it's more energy dense, they can eat less to meet their calorific requirements. And at that stage, that might be very important.
Thank you.
All right. So, Pete, there was another question you asked. What was that about? Oh, yeah, it was about the soap seed and the Niger. They always pick out the Niger from the egg food, but I'll let Kevin answer that, but I'm presuming they just like your Niger.
I haven't looked at the Have a look online, Pete, and have a look at the protein content of the Niger. If they're selectively feeding on it, I wouldn't like to say off the top of my head what its protein value would be and benefits over traditional millet. What I can say is your traditional millets are all the bloody same anyway, but I'm not sure on Niger. Certainly there's things like sunflower and things that do have higher protein and fat content. We know that. That's why a lot of bigger parrots get obese. And there is perhaps a logic in some of those feeds being used for in rearing foods or weanling birds. But again, they're not pitching in the high enough protein level. But for a recently weaned baby, you know, a 16% protein seed is probably going to have an impact over a 12%. So that's where your Groats canary seed or even some different seeds with a higher protein content at that stage might help, is getting the calories in with less volume because they're still messing about trying to learn how to feed them. And because we're so concerned with them having their heads bitten off as we're weaning them sooner than they would, you know, and it's a short, sharp shock as well, isn't it? It's you're either with your parents or you're not. There's not a gradual weaning process. You're either in there or you're not. So yeah, have a look online, Pete, and see. There will be lots of resources out there telling you what the nutritional value of Niger is relative. And I would look at the protein content and look at the energy content relative.
Oily seed, what's the other oily seed that the budgies?
Linseed.
Linseed or rape.
No, that wasn't the one I was thinking of.
Have a look, Pete.
Oily seed like sunflower.
Yeah.
I mean, the other one. Oh, you might be talking about safflower, maybe.
Sunflower's oily.
No, safflower.
It is too.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, Kevin, was the fact that a lot of the guys say about using soaked pulses. Well, I never have, but I don't know. So, like, is that an old wives' tale, or is it?
No, a lot of the beans and pulses are quite high in protein as well, and a lot of people do use those too. And absolutely, you know, much as I've given you what I'm doing for my own simple purposes, I guess there's no set rules here, you know. And if you want to look at soaking pulses or you want to look at using higher protein content seeds, absolutely, that's fine. But I think the thing I'm trying to get you to think about is, why would I want to add that? Let's go and pop on. Just pop online and put nutritional value of pulses. There's going to be loads of resources on there that will give you an idea of what the protein levels are and what impact it's going to have. And I think then you've got to look at how, when you're formulating what you're going to do for the birds, you've got to think about, okay, I'm adding this into it. Am I going to add this as a separate thing? Is this going to be added to my soft food? You know, you've got to look at making these things how you want to do them. I guess my advice to you is at least have some sort of reason for why you're doing it. Because, you know, I always ask that question. People say, why have you done that? Oh, I don't know. Well, then why are you doing it then? You've got no basis for why you're adding pulses to it. But yes, they're good, but have a look and check out their protein value and work out how you want to do them. But yes, no objection either.
Okay.
Thank you. Right. Well, we got to carry on because it's getting late. And, you know, as much as I love Tony Pringle, he was here and he always made me pack up early. Well, anyway, we've got a couple more questions. I want to get through them.
Two more, and that's it then.
Okay, 50% protein is the mealworms. But is there anything higher? Is there a commercial product that we could buy to fill up to higher our protein value?
There are. George spends most of his life eating them. Whey protein being one. George, talk about protein supplements for bodybuilders.
Well, I remember you and me had this discussion a long time ago, and I said, I'm looking here, and what about some whey protein? This isn't whey protein actually, but it is protein and amino acids. But yeah, there's hundreds of different ones and tasteless ones, and so this one has got absolutely no carbohydrates or fat in it. It's just protein and amino acids. So they're broken down protein so you can absorb them quicker. I don't think we need that for the birds, but if you want to increase it, just use protein powders. And there are hundreds of cheap, shitty ones, which will probably be fine for the birds, in my opinion.
I after that discussion, George, I started adding in whey protein, the unflavored whey protein into mine, which is 80% protein, just as a powder, which obviously makes it difficult for consistency. But I guess you can spread it across the soft feed more evenly. But again, you know, you've got to look at ways of trying to balance that out. And for me, you know, the 80%, 50% was my minimum sort of target for an addition, because I want to try and bump that level up without feeding just mealworms, for example, or just something else. So the higher protein supplements you get, you can get away with a smaller volume in addition to bump up your protein, which hopefully then is going to keep your palatability, not be overriding it with one product. So yeah, I'd be using whey protein on mine.
So with an 80%, with an 80% whey protein, we could actually bump our protein value up in our soft foods to 40% without too much trouble.
You'd still have difficulty.
Would we?
Because if you want, because it depends on what you're doing. But I mean, you know, you're looking, if you want to get up to 40 and your whey protein's 80 and you're feeding a basic soft food of 16% protein, you need 2/3 of it to be whey protein. That's not practical.
It's not. Okay. Well,
but it is going to have a greater impact. This is what I was saying to Ian. You know, choosing something with a wheat germ with 30% protein versus choosing a whey protein something with 80. There's a massive difference in terms of the impact that's going to have in the protein content and quality of protein maybe in that food source. So again, I'm not telling you how to feed your birds. That's not the way at all. I'm just trying to say these are the main areas that we need to be looking at, and I'd like you to critically look at them and think, okay, how best can I do this? How can I add this? How am I going to train my birds to take extra protein, or train my birds to get X, Y, and Z, and try and just have a bit of logic behind it, and not even necessarily science, because we haven't got much science. Logic would do, and that's what I'm asking for.
Is that something you might look at? You know, high protein products to go in now. I mean, look at George. You know, right? Unless it's his camera, I'm telling you, I'm sure he's put on some. He's been bodybuilding now, George, hasn't he? Have you noticed the muscles and the width of his chest? What's he been doing?
I've put on 10, 15 kilos since lockdown. Yeah,
I can see
there is
it.
some fat. There is some fat, but I knew that was going to happen. That was bound to happen. But I
can see the boobs.
So when I get to April or May, and I'll start cutting my calories again, and then hopefully I'll have some better shaped muscles underneath. That's the plan.
All right. Anyway,
I think, John, very, very briefly, is when we're looking at, and I think nutritional research is one of the things that the BS should be looking at, pushing more and more. I think that's something that's going to have a much wider impact on budgies generally than messing about anything else. But we have to look at what we can do practically within the constraints of Animal Welfare Acts and UK legislation, what's achievable financially, what's achievable practically. And that's why vitamin D is an easy one to target, because I can blood sample for it. You know, to try and quantify the impacts of higher protein diets on budgies and starting to, you know, there just isn't the way of quantifying the beneficial effects on that. Now, that said, if we have an idea of the ballpark that we need, then absolutely going back and doing detailed nutrient analysis on soft foods that people are feeding and saying, okay, this one here actually has had an impact on the soft food content, that's very, very doable. But if you want to do a detailed nutrient analysis of a soft food mixture that you have created, it's about $5,000 to get a detailed nutrient analysis of that product.
So I'll send you a check.
Most of your small bird supplement makers who are saying, oh, this is amazing, they're not spending the money to analyze it. That's why these small 2-bit products have no analysis on there at all. Oh, it contains it. Does it really? How much? Oh, you've no idea. Because they're not big enough to spend the $5,000 on food analysis. Bear in mind that's per sample. So if they make one up and send it and they spend $5,000, they go, oh, we need to add a bit more of this, and they reformulate it. That's another $5,000 they're spending to do it the second time around.
That's fair enough.
That's why the small companies do not know what they're doing. Whereas if you go and look at the likes of Harrison's, you look at the likes of Versalager, you've got a detailed nutrient analysis because they sell so much, they've had to get that done. You know what is in that product, and you know NutriBird or Katie, for example, that's fine for rearing birds. Parrots have been reared on it for decades and been absolutely fine and grown okay. That's a good benchmark for me. Then, if that's going to rear my hyacinth macaws, and that's their sole food source, I'm going to pitch at that as that's what I try and get for my budgies, and that's what we're trying to work back from. Going back from the, well, how much soft food are you eating versus seed, and how do I need to change that to try and emulate that whole diet to match NutriBird, to match Harrison's, to match that rearing food, maybe to match growers' pellets for poultry.
Right.
I have one. Sorry, just on that. I really don't want. one more thought. And it's not one that came to me before when we've been talking about this, so it's new. So it might be crap. But we know that birds, the budgies will eat. If you put a chicken carcass in, they will eat it. Or if one dies and you don't get there quick enough, they'll eat that as well. So, what about if we have some minced chicken or turkey and put that in the soft food? If it's been removed after a couple of hours, it's not going to be long enough. 4 hours is for human hygiene. It has to be removed by. Why don't we add that?
No. Two reasons, George. Reason number one is you're talking adding muscle mass. You're not talking adding the whole carcass. This goes back to the whole issue with raw diets for birds or for reptiles or for dogs and cats, and God forbid those people that are stupid enough to do it, is you're not feeding the entire carcass. If you took a whole chicken and minced it up, bones and gizzard and gut content and everything, and fed that, knock yourself out, because we know the nutrient composition of a chicken matches the nutrient composition of a budgie, if that makes sense. We know their eggs match each other. So feed the whole prey item. But if you're going to start selecting parts of that carcass, which you will be, nah, because there's no calcium
we're not trying to add, I'm just talking about adding protein. We're already added calcium. We've already added all the other things that we want. I'm just saying to buff up the protein content. It's higher than 82% for the whey protein. It's more palatable because they eat it. It's easy enough. Well, it's not super easy actually, but it might be an option for some people. I mean, you don't even have to add it in the soft food. You can just feed it separate if you want it.
I guess then, George, yeah, okay. If you're talking, sorry, I was going at it from a different angle from you. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
If I take it from your angle, then yes, what you're saying is I want to use a animal meat product now as opposed to invertebrate product to push up my protein content. Yeah, I mean, I give mine get eggs. Why not get chicken as well? I see no reason why not. I would stick again for human food hygiene, that sort of thing. I guess you'd have to go back and say, okay, what is the protein content of the feed that I'm feeding? But yeah, I have no objection in doing that. It just never really entered my head. Again, it's going down to practicality. So the meal ones are dry, they can sit there, they're dead easy. If I've got to cook chicken and then dice it all up and blitz it up and add it to my mix, that is quite challenging. You're not wrong, and I can see in that context but I would probably give it as a part of a soft food mix to try and improve palatability whilst giving protein versus giving it as a standalone in the shed and seeing what they did with it.
Right.
Anyway,
okay.
Sorry, we've gone on too long.
No, that's all right, George. It was perfect timing because you asked the question that Dawn Sandy from North America wanted to know about, chucking a chicken in. So it's perfect timing. Okay. So I think we're done, really. I mean, George, you came up with a load of. If anyone wants to look in the chat list, George came up with a load of stuff all about slug slime and things.
Oh, excellent. That's what I found briefly.
He's been on Google. And what else have we got on there? Niger seed contains 17 to 30% protein. Yeah, I think that's about it. And yeah, I'll tell you what, I had a fantastic night. And I would say, out of all Kevin's talks, for me, this is the number one. Thank you very much. I thank you very much. And well, what's the time? It's 10:15. It's the latest we've ever been out because Tony Pringle wouldn't let me stay out this late. So,
I've got to go and feed a baby recessive pied that's probably hungry. Got to go and sneak in while the hen's sleeping and feed it now.
Have you got anything more to say, Kevin? Apart from just
I always have lots to say, but not tonight.
No, we're done. Well, if you want to go and do your recessive pied, has anybody else got any questions that they? Well, no, we've asked Kevin. He's going to go and feed his recessive pied. So, does anyone else want to ask anybody anything?
They could always stick it on the health group, and we can have a chat on the health group and have continued discussions there, John. That would be very positive.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't know because we've got a few new people in tonight looking. Good night, Kevin. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, can you close your window down so I can try and see another 9 or 25? How do I do that? Right, view.
John, just quick. When should we sort out? You know.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right.
So
what's a good
out
time?
tomorrow. Yeah. Anytime you like, Adrian. I'll find you. I'll put you in touch with a man that can help you out.
Okay.
Cheers, Adrian.
Thank you. Good night. Very interesting.
Good night.
Good night, my friend. Yeah. So I think are we going to end? Anyone want to ask anybody anything? Like anyone ask George how big he's got or anything? What he weighs or
94.2 kilos.
Nice one. I'll tell you what.
25.
Suits you, George. Tell you, I don't want to be in a fight with you. That's for sure. Right.
I've just got a fat tummy. That's all it is.
I'm going to say good night to you all. Thank you very much for all the visitors tonight, and I hope some of you will become Dartford members, because this is what we do 3 times a month. We have a health talk. We have a through the keyhole with somebody, hopefully an expert breeder, who shows us around their bird room and tells us all how they do it. And our last thing every month is a show, our online show. And there's, as I've said, there's probably going to be no shows till around about July, August, September time. So we will have a show every month between now and then. So as many of you, if you could get involved, the show involves getting a show cage, putting a bird in it, and putting it in front of your laptop or your iPhone, and we will find a judge to judge it. And last year we did a prize for just a random prize for what was it, a raffle, George, wasn't it? But I think this year this year I think we should do the prize for the winner. So to make it worthwhile, bringing you some birds, and I will make sure the prizes are worthwhile. So I'm going to say good night to you all. Who's in charge of turning it all off?
I think Kevin. It's not me.
Well, he's got, hasn't he? So I've got an end button here, so I think I'm going to press it.
You're the host. You can do it.
Okay, right. Well, I've got an end button here, so I'm going to say good night to you all. It's good night from me, and it's good night from him. Good night.
Good night.